Hey there, story lovers. This is Supreme Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Gringotts Cursebreakers proved Harry was heir to every extinct house and made Fudge resign. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Audit. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry had always thought was the least remarkable day of the week, and so it seemed fitting that the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to him arrived on one. He was in the back garden of number 4, Privet Drive, pulling weeds from Aunt Petunia's flower bed in the particular miserable way that involved kneeling on damp soil while the morning sun aimed itself directly at the back of his neck. The Dursleys had discovered, somewhat to their frustration, that threatening Harry with Voldemort's name no longer worked the way it used to. Harry had sat through Vernon's post-Hogwarts speech about rules and expectations with such complete stillness that Vernon had eventually trailed off mid-sentence, unnerved by the absence of the usual flinch. They'd settled on garden work as a compromise between their need to feel superior and their new, animal wariness of pushing too hard. Harry didn't mind the garden. It gave him something to do with his hands while his brain went in circles. Fourth year had ended 43 days ago. He'd counted. Cedric Diggory had been dead for 43 days, and Voldemort had been back for 43 days, and Harry had been at Privet Drive trying very hard not to think about either of those things for exactly as long. The Order of the Phoenix, whoever they were, had sent a letter through Dumbledore telling him to stay put and not do anything. Hermione wrote cheerful, careful letters that avoided anything important. Ron's were shorter and somehow more honest for it. One had simply read, "This is rubbish, isn't it?" Yes. Anyway. Fred and George have a new product. It explodes purple. Harry had read that one 3 times. The owl arrived just as he'd gotten to the particularly stubborn root system under the rosebush. It wasn't Hedwig, it was enormous, coal-black, and wearing what appeared to be a small brass collar with a Gringotts seal on it. It landed on the fence post with the air of a creature that had never been ignored in its life and did not intend to start now. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at it. It stared back with flat, gold eyes and extended its leg with the specific dignity of a bird that was being paid for this. The envelope was thick parchment, deep cream, with his name written in ink that had a faint metallic sheen. Not Mr. H. Potter or Harry Potter, the smallest bedroom, just Lord Harry James Potter, in letters that sat on the page with absolute confidence. Harry looked at that for a long moment. Then he opened it. The letter was from someone named Sharp Fong, Senior Cursebreaker, Department of Dormant Estates, Gringotts Bank of London. It was 3 paragraphs long and written in the clipped, precise style of someone who considered small talk a personal insult. The relevant part, once Harry had worked through the formal language, was this: Gringotts was conducting a mandatory audit of all dormant and extinct Wizarding House vaults, as required by the Treaty of Ironhold, 1867. During the course of this audit, certain findings had emerged regarding Harry's estate that required his immediate personal attention. He was to present himself at Gringotts on Thursday the 14th at 10 o'clock in the morning. Transportation had been arranged. He was to bring no one with him. This was non-negotiable. There was a postscript, added in slightly different ink, as if it had been decided upon after the formal letter was already written: bring identification if you have it. If you do not have it, your blood will suffice. Harry read the letter twice, then looked at the date. Thursday was tomorrow. He went inside and wrote a short note to Dumbledore explaining where he was going and why. He didn't ask permission. He folded it, gave it to Hedwig, and went back to the rosebush. He didn't hear back that evening. At 9 the next morning, a Gringotts carriage, low, black, drawn by 2 horses that were definitely not entirely horses, appeared at the end of Privet Drive and waited with its door open. The neighbors didn't seem to notice it. Petunia noticed it, went pale, and very deliberately looked away. Harry grabbed his jacket and walked down to meet it. Gringotts at 10 in the morning was a different creature than Gringotts on a busy shopping day. There were still goblins at every station, still the faint smell of stone dust and old gold and something electric that Harry had always associated with old magic, but the tourist hour chaos was absent. Their footsteps, Harry's and those of the goblin who'd been waiting at the carriage, who had introduced himself as Griphook Superior and declined to elaborate, echoed in a way they usually didn't. They went past the main hall, past the counters, through a door Harry had never used before, and down a corridor that went steadily downhill into a part of the bank that felt older than the street above it. The stone here was darker, the torches in iron brackets rather than the polished sconces upstairs, and the doors they passed were sealed with magic that Harry could feel pressing against his skin like a change in air pressure. The room they stopped at was large enough to be comfortable, which surprised him. He'd expected something like a vault, cramped, stone, bare. Instead it had a table of dark wood, 6 chairs, and walls lined with filing cabinets that reached the ceiling. 3 goblins were already seated. On the table were documents, many of them, spread in careful order, and a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, closed, with a lock that looked like no mechanism Harry had ever seen. Mr. Potter. The goblin at the head of the table stood. He was older than the others, his face a geography of lines and sharp intelligence, wearing robes of deep grey with Gringotts gold at the collar. I am Ragnarok, Director of Estates, Gringotts, London. Be seated. Harry sat. He noticed the goblin didn't call him Lord anything, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he appreciated that. Do you know what the Treaty of Ironhold is? Ragnarok asked, without preamble. No. Good. That means you're not going to tell me something incorrect and waste our time. Ragnarok settled back. In 1867, following the last major dispute between Goblin banking institutions and the British Ministry of Magic, a treaty was signed that established, among other things, certain obligations on our part regarding dormant estates. Specifically, when a wizarding house has been extinct for a century or more, or when the last known heir has reached majority without claiming their inheritance, Gringotts is legally required to conduct a full audit of the estate and make direct contact with any surviving heirs. He paused. You turned 15 last month. I know when my birthday is. Something shifted in Ragnarok's expression, not quite a smile, but in the territory adjacent to one. The audit of your estate began, therefore, on the 1st of August. It was conducted by my best cursebreakers. He nodded toward the 2 goblins on his left. Sharpfang and Goldthorn. They will present their findings. Sharpfang was angular and businesslike. She stood and opened a folder with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found human reactions to it consistently entertaining. We began, as is standard, with the Potter estate. The vault is well documented, you've had access since age 11. The Trust Vault is a subsidiary. The main Potter Vault is significantly larger than you've been led to believe, but we'll return to that. Standard audit flags were raised during an examination of the Potter family tree. She spread a document on the table, a long parchment, hand-drawn, branching back centuries. The Potter line, on your paternal side, carries inheritance markers for 3 extinct houses. This is not unusual, old families interconnected constantly, and inheritance through female lines was frequently tracked for centuries before being considered dormant. What was unusual was the concentration. Harry looked at the family tree. His name was at the bottom. Above him, James. Above James, a cascade of names going back further than he'd expected, branching sideways in ways that meant nothing to him yet. 3 houses on the Potter side, Sharpfang continued. House Peveril, the oldest. The line of the Peveril brothers, extinct in the direct male line for centuries, has been waiting for the last magical descendant to claim it. You are that descendant. Then House Gryffindor, Harry's head came up. Yes, Sharpfang said, without any particular inflection, as if she said things like this every day, and perhaps she did. The Gryffindor line did not end with Godric Gryffindor. He had one daughter, who married into the Peveril family in the 12th century. The inheritance has passed through that line ever since. Dormant for 300 years. Yours. She moved to the next page. House Slytherin. The room was very quiet. The Slytherin line, Sharpfang said, passed through the female line to the Gaunt family, which you may know of. Mara P. Gaunt, the last of that line, died in 1927. Her son, Tom Riddle, known as Lord Voldemort, renounced his birth name and with it, technically, his magical claim to the Slytherin inheritance. Under Goblin law, a magical heir who formally renounces their name surrenders their estate claim. The inheritance reverted to the next eligible line. She tapped the family tree. The Peveril connection. Which leads, again, to you. Harry was quiet for a moment. I'm Slytherin's heir. You're everyone's heir, Goldthorn said, from the end of the table, with what sounded dangerously like satisfaction. We haven't finished. Sharpfang moved to the next folder. Your maternal line is where things become significantly more complex. Your mother, Lily Evans Potter, was a Muggle-born witch. However, and this is what triggered a deeper audit, Lily Evans was not, in fact, Muggle-born. Harry went very still. Her mother, Rose Evans née Dagworth Granger, was a squib. Sharpfang's voice was matter-of-fact, precise, carrying the information the way a surgeon carries a scalpel, efficiently, with full awareness of what it will cut. A squib from House Dagworth Granger, an extinct noble house whose last titled member died in 1943. Your grandmother was removed from the Wizarding family registry as a child, a not uncommon practice when a squib was born to a prominent family, particularly in that era. She was placed with a Muggle family, took the Evans name through marriage, and the connection to the Wizarding world was, as far as the family was concerned, severed. Sharpfang looked up. It was not severed in Goblin law. Inheritance does not recognize social erasure. My mother was a half-blood, Harry said slowly. Correct. Which means every person who ever cited your mother's blood status as a political point was working from false information. Sharpfang allowed herself one small, pointed pause. Shall I continue? Please. House Dagworth Granger gives you access to 3 subsidiary house claims through intermarriage in the 17th and 18th centuries, House Cromwell of the Wizarding variety, not the historical Muggle figure, House Vane, and House Beaumont, the latter being a French wizarding house with British holdings. That brings us to 8. She turned another page. Through the Peveril Gryffindor connection, there is a dormant claim to House Merlin, Harry repeated. Not the Merlin, Ragnarok said, with a slight edge. A descendant house. The name was adopted by a minor noble family in the 14th century as a mark of honor. The actual bloodline of the historical Merlin is a separate and considerably more complicated matter that we are not addressing today. Right. House Merlin of the 14th century is 9, Sharpfang said. House Ravenscroft is 10, a purely inheritance by treaty situation, documented and straightforward. And House Blackwood is 11, through a 1689 marriage contract that was never dissolved and whose inheritance clause passed to the Peveril line upon Blackwood's extinction in 1743. She closed the folder. 11 houses total, including Potter. All valid under Goblin law. All corroborated by blood magic testing, conducted on the 14th of last month with a sample obtained from your trust vault key, which retains a blood signature. Harry looked at the documents spread across the table. He looked at the wooden box. He looked at his hands, which were very ordinary hands, still with a faint dirt shadow at the knuckles from yesterday's garden work, and tried to find some feeling that matched the scale of what he'd just been told. What he found instead was a question. How long have these houses been dormant? The most recent, Sharpfang said, House Blackwood, has been dormant since 1743. The oldest claim, House Peveril, since the 13th century. So for 250 years, at minimum, nobody at Gringotts thought to find the heir. Ragnarok's expression shifted slightly. The Treaty of Ironhold required us to act upon majority. Prior to that, the estates were held in trust. Prior to that, Harry said carefully, for 250 years, these houses had seats on the Wizengamot that were sitting empty. Laws were passed or blocked without those votes being cast. Is that right? A beat of silence. That is a matter for the Wizengamot to address, Ragnarok said. But it's accurate. It is not inaccurate. Harry nodded slowly. He looked at the box. What's in there? Ragnarok gestured to Goldthorn, who brought the box forward and set it in front of Harry. Up close, the lock resolved itself into something that wasn't a mechanical mechanism at all. It was a blood seal, ancient and dark around the edges in the way that very old magic goes dark, like aged wood. The lordship rings, Ragnarok said. When an heir claims a house, the ring presents itself. You would need to provide a blood sample to open the box. Whatever rings respond to your claim will become accessible. A pause. I should inform you that in the history of Gringotts, no individual has ever had more than 4 houses present themselves simultaneously. The record, held by Arcturus Black the Elder in 1899, was 4. Harry looked at the box. He was 15 years old. He'd grown up in a cupboard. He'd been told he was unremarkable, unwanted, ordinary except for the scar, and later told the scar was the whole of him, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the symbol. Nobody had ever asked what he wanted. Nobody had ever sat him down and said, "Here is what belongs to you." He pulled out his wand, made a small cut on the pad of his thumb, and pressed it to the lock. The seal flared gold. The box opened. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, 11 rings gleamed up at him. Different metals, different stones, different ages, some of them radiating a kind of quiet magical warmth even through the air between them, some cool and still. All 11. Every single one. Ragnarok stared at the box for a long moment. Well, he said, and there was something in his voice Harry had not heard from a goblin before. Something that might, in a creature less dignified, have been called awe. That is unprecedented. Can I put them on? Harry asked. Traditionally, the heir wears the primary house ring, in your case, Potter, and the others are held in the estate until formal claiming. However, Ragnarok said, you may wear as many as you choose. They will resize. Harry picked up the Potter ring first. It was simple, gold band, a single griffin embossed on the flat face, with a small ruby eye. It was warm in his fingers with a warmth that wasn't temperature so much as recognition, and when he slid it onto the ring finger of his right hand it contracted gently to fit, and something settled in Harry's chest, quiet and solid, like a door closing properly for the first time. Then he picked up the Peveril ring. He recognized it immediately, 3 interlocking shapes on a black stone, the Deathly Hallows symbol. This one felt old in a way that made his skin prickle, old the way standing stones feel old when you put your hand on them in the rain. He put it on. One by one, he took the others. Some he could identify from the emblems, the Serpent of Slytherin. He spent a moment with that one, then put it on with deliberate calm, the eagle that was probably Ravenscroft, the tower that might have been Beaumont. Some he couldn't identify yet. He would learn. He put them all on, distributing them between both hands, and when he finished his hands felt weighted and certain in a way his body hadn't since before the third task. He looked up at Ragnarok. You said my main Potter vault is larger than I've been led to believe. Significantly. How much larger? Ragnarok named a figure. Harry kept his expression still with some effort. And my trust vault, the one I've been using, is what percentage of that? Approximately, Ragnarok said, 1.3. Someone limited my access to 1% of my own inheritance. Technically, a minor's access to their full estate is at the discretion of their magical guardian until they reach majority. Your magical guardianship was assigned by the Wizengamot the night your parents died. Who holds my magical guardianship? Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, said Ragnarok, has held it since the 2nd of November, 1981. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, distantly, he could hear London going about its morning, the muffled sound of a bus, a horn, the city's indifferent roar. Here in this stone room under Gringotts, surrounded by the evidence of everything that had been kept from him, Harry felt something shift in him that was not rage, exactly, though there was rage in it. It was more precise than rage. It was the feeling of seeing the shape of a thing clearly for the first time. A picture assembling itself from fragments he'd been collecting for years without knowing what they were. He said, "What does magical guardianship allow a person to do?" Sharpfang answered, "Because this was clearly her territory. A magical guardian has legal authority to act in the heir's interest until majority. This includes managing correspondence on behalf of the heir, my mail. Restricting vault access for the heir's protection, my money. Petitioning the Wizengamot on the heir's behalf, my seats. And placing monitoring or protective enchantments on the heir's person or residence." Sharpfang met his eyes. "We found evidence of a tracking and notification charm attached to your blood wards at Privet Drive. It notifies the guardian of any significant magical activity in or around the heir's location." Harry thought about Dobby in second year. About the hover charm that had gotten him nearly expelled. About the letter that had arrived within what felt like minutes. He knew, Harry said. Every time. He always knew. It would appear so. Harry set both hands flat on the table and looked at the rings. 11 inheritances, 1.3% of his own money, 250 years of empty Wizengamot seats, a guardian who'd monitored his every move without telling him. The picture was very clear now. Very complete. He looked at Ragnarok. "What do I need to do to formally claim all 11 houses?" "A blood ritual claiming ceremony, conducted here at Gringotts. It takes approximately 2 hours. Afterward, your status as lord of each house is legally binding under both Goblin law and Wizarding law, as the latter inherited the Treaty of Ironhold's definitions." Ragnarok paused. "You should be aware that claiming 11 houses simultaneously will trigger a magical response that is, not subtle. The claiming ceremony for multiple ancient houses has not been performed in recorded Goblin history. We don't know precisely what to expect." "That's fine," Harry said. "When can we do it?" We had cleared the remainder of the day in anticipation. Ragnarok's tone was entirely neutral, but something behind his eyes was paying very close attention. "We can begin immediately." "Good." Harry folded the letters, Sharpfang's report, the family tree, the summary of the magical guardianship, and tucked them inside his jacket. "I also want a full accounting of every Wizengamot vote that was cast or blocked in any of my house's names since 1981. And I want to know the current status of the magical guardianship, specifically whether it terminates automatically at majority or whether it requires formal revocation." Sharpfang was already making notes. "Majority in Wizarding law is 17, not 15. Then I need to know how to revoke it early. It requires a petition to the Wizengamot, a valid reason, and support from a blood relative or legally recognized guardian substitute." Sharpfang glanced up. Sirius Black, if exonerated, would qualify as a blood relative and guardian substitute simultaneously. "He's innocent," Harry said. "We both know that. What we know and what is legally established are not always the same thing," Ragnarok said carefully. "No," Harry agreed. "But they can be made to match." He stood up, and the rings caught the torchlight and threw small points of gold and red and green around the stone walls, and he looked at Ragnarok and said, with the simple certainty of someone who has just discovered they've been underestimating themselves for years, "Let's go claim some houses." The ceremony room was deeper still, down a passage that sloped sharply and smelled of water and stone and magic so old it felt geological. The room itself was circular, the floor inlaid with metal in patterns that Harry's new sense of old magic registered as active, not decorative. Ragnarok explained as he went, the blood offerings required, the words of claiming in old gobbledygook and older English, the way the magic would respond. What he didn't fully prepare Harry for was the physical reality of it. The first claiming, House Peveril, was like plunging both hands into cold water. A shock, a gasp, and then warmth spreading up his arms and settling in his chest. The Peveril ring on his finger pulsed once, bright, and went still. The second, House Gryffindor, was warmth from the start. Deep, amber warmth that felt like a fire in a room you've walked into from outside, and with it something that felt embarrassingly like being hugged, which Harry immediately decided not to mention to anyone. Slytherin was cold and sharp and not unfriendly, exactly, but watchful. It settled at the back of his awareness like a presence that had been waiting a very long time and was reserving judgment. The others came in waves, and by the sixth Harry's hands were shaking, not with pain but with the effort of containing it, all these inheritances with their accumulated centuries, their sleeping magic waking up and recognizing the blood that had summoned them. By the ninth his vision had gone strangely bright around the edges. By the 10th he was on one knee on the inlaid floor, not because he'd meant to kneel but because standing wasn't entirely feasible. The 11th, House Blackwood, the last, arrived like a thunderclap. The torches went out. In the sudden dark, Harry felt 11 distinct magical signatures align inside him, ancient and enormous and somehow coherent, like instruments finding the same key. And then all of them, simultaneously, recognized each other and recognized him, and the room blazed with light that had no visible source, gold and silver and a deep emerald green, and the metal inlay in the floor shifted and rearranged and carved itself, in the space of 3 seconds, into something new. Something that incorporated 11 different house sigils into a single design, with a stag at the center. Harry knelt in the middle of it, breathing hard, hands pressed to the floor. Ragnarok stood at the edge of the room, very still, watching. "Well," said Sharp Fong, from behind him, sounding genuinely shaken for the first time, "that's new." Harry got to his feet. His hands had stopped shaking. The rings were warm and steady. He felt different. Not larger, exactly. More settled. As if he'd been slightly out of phase with himself his entire life and had just been corrected, like an instrument finely tuned. "It's done?" he asked. "It's done," Ragnarok confirmed. His voice was careful. "You are, as of this moment, the legally recognized Lord of 11 noble and ancient houses of Britain and France. The documentation has been filed with Gringotts, the Goblin Council, and copies will be sent to the British Ministry of Magic as required by the Treaty of Ironhold. When will the Ministry receive their copies?" "They will be delivered this evening." Harry nodded. "Then I have some letters to write before morning." He looked at Ragnarok. "I need a full legal team. Goblin law advisors who understand Wizengamot procedure. I need the accounting of blocked votes I asked for earlier. And I need to understand exactly what rights and authorities the lordship of 11 houses grants me in terms of legal standing, Wizengamot access, and the ability to challenge existing orders, including, specifically, the magical guardianship." Ragnarok regarded him for a long moment with those flat, gold, measuring eyes. Then he said, "You're not what we expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed more time to process the situation before understanding its implications." Harry looked at the sigil on the floor, the stag at the center of 11 house emblems, and then back at Ragnarok. "I've been processing since I was 11, he said. "I just didn't know what I was processing until today." He walked out of the ceremony room with all 11 rings warm on his fingers and a very specific, very calm kind of fury settled in his chest like ballast on a ship, not weighing him down, but keeping him absolutely level. The Gringotts carriage was waiting when he emerged into the afternoon sun. London was going about its business, indifferent and ordinary, red buses and black cabs and pigeons on every available ledge. Harry sat in the carriage and unfolded the documents from inside his jacket. He read through the magical guardianship summary again carefully, and then the Wizengamot structure notes Sharp Fong had pressed into his hands as he left, and he began, in the margins, to write questions. There were a lot of questions. He had a lot of time left before dinner. By the time the carriage reached Privet Drive, he had written 12 pages. He arrived back at number 4 to find a barn owl from Dumbledore sitting on his windowsill, looking ruffled and self-important. The letter it carried was brief: "Harry, I understand you received a Gringotts summons. I trust you will keep me informed of any significant developments." And signed with the full flourish. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it neatly, set it aside, and began writing his first official letter as Lord of 11 Houses. It was addressed to Madame Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and it was not brief. It was 3 pages, carefully considered, citing specific clauses of the Treaty of Ironhold and 2 wizarding inheritance statutes that Sharp Fong had underlined for him. It explained the audit findings. It detailed the magical guardianship and its restrictions. It made no accusations, just asked specific, unanswerable questions. He sealed it with the Potter ring. He'd learned from Ragnarok that each ring had a wax seal, and the Potter's seal would be legally recognized, and attached it to Hedwig, who regarded him with bright, interested eyes. "Fast as you can," he told her, "but don't get caught." Hedwig ruffled her feathers with the air of someone who found the second part of that instruction slightly insulting, and was gone. He sat on his bed in the smallest bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, with 11 rings on his fingers and 12 pages of questions in his lap and the specific, clear-eyed calm of someone who has just decided that asking for permission is no longer on the table. He was 15 years old. He'd been lied to, managed, kept deliberately small. His money had been restricted. His mail had been monitored. His political inheritance, centuries of it, had sat empty because nobody had thought to tell him it existed. He was not angry in the way he'd been angry after the 3rd task, all raw wound and shaking hands. He was angry in a way that had edges now. Structure. Direction. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, at the top, "What I need." Then he began to list. Sirius exonerated. Guardianship revoked. Vault access restored. Wizengamot seats claimed. Blocked legislation reviewed. Audit of ministry interference in estate matters. He looked at the list. He crossed out Sirius exonerated and wrote above it, Sirius exonerated first. Then he wrote, at the bottom of the page, a name, Tom Riddle. He underlined it. Then he closed the notebook and went to bed, and slept better than he had in 43 days. Chapter 2, Old Names, New Teeth. The ministry owl arrived at Privet Drive at 6:47 in the morning, 2 days after Harry's visit to Gringotts, and it came with 3 friends. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, sitting at his desk with Sharpfang's documents spread around him like a paper landscape, cross-referencing the list of blocked Wizengamot votes against the legislative history she'd included in a supplementary packet. The work was dry and technical and he found he didn't mind that at all. There was something satisfying about sitting with a problem that had specific dimensions, that could be measured and mapped, after years of dealing with threats that arrived without warning and left without explanation. The 4 owls landed on his windowsill in a row and waited with varying degrees of patience. One of them, the smallest, a quick little brown bird, was already dancing foot to foot with what appeared to be genuine urgency. Harry took the letters in order of apparent importance. The first, from the ministry, was on official parchment with the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He opened it and read it standing up. "Dear Lord Potter," it began, and the title sat on the page in Amelia Bones's precise, square handwriting as if she'd been using it for years. "Thank you for your communication of the 14th. I have reviewed the documentation you forwarded and have confirmed its validity with Gringotts independently. I will be direct, the matters you raise are serious, and several of them fall within the DMLE's jurisdiction in ways that concern me professionally. I would like to meet at your earliest convenience. I can come to you, if that is preferable, or arrange a neutral location. I am not forwarding this communication to the minister's office at this time. You will understand why." Harry read that last line twice, and the corners of his mouth moved. She'd understood immediately. The second letter was from Gringotts, Sharp Fong, with the accounting he'd requested of every Wizengamot vote cast or blocked under his house's name since 1981. It was attached to a document so dense with information that Harry set it aside immediately for proper reading. The covering note said, 47 pieces of legislation. 29 blocked. 18 passed with proxy votes cast in your name by Dumbledore acting as guardian. Of particular note, Creature Rights Reform Act, 1988, blocked 3 times. Sirius Black Posthumous Pardon Petition, 1994, blocked once. There was a pause in the writing, as if Sharp Fong had stopped, considered whether to say the next thing, and decided to. The 1994 petition was blocked by a single vote. That vote was cast in the name of House Peveril. Harry stood very still for a moment. Then he set the letter down very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter, and picked up the third letter. This one was from Hermione. He could tell before opening it because of the handwriting and the slight fragrance of the parchment that came from whatever expensive stationery she used, which she'd been using since second year and which Harry associated irrationally with the feeling of having things explained properly. The letter was long, of course it was long, and it had been written in stages, he could tell, because the ink color shifted slightly between sections and the handwriting changed register from measured to agitated and back again. Harry, it started. Something has happened and I need you to tell me everything immediately. I received a Gringotts notice, not for me, but a secondary notification that gets sent to people registered as close associates of a newly declared lord under Treaty Clause 14b, which I only know about because I went to the library the moment I got it and read the entire Treaty of Ironhold, which is available in the Wizarding Law section, and Harry, it's 11 houses. The notice just said, 11 dormant estates claimed, with your name, and I nearly knocked over an entire bookshelf. Ron got the same notice. His is probably at the bottom of his owl cage still. Please tell me what's happening, I have so many questions. I've written 12 of them down already. The handwriting shifted here to the more agitated version. Also, I should tell you that Dumbledore came to my house yesterday. He was perfectly polite and perfectly vague, and he asked if I'd heard from you recently and whether you seemed, well, and I told him you seemed fine because as far as I knew you were fine, but Harry, the way he asked it was, he was worried. Not worried the way someone worries about a friend. Worried the way someone worries about a situation getting out of their control. I've been thinking about it ever since. Right back immediately. Harry thought about the Sirius Black posthumous pardon petition, 1994, blocked by a proxy vote cast in the name of House Peveril, a house whose heir had not been informed it existed. He thought about Dumbledore at Hermione's house, asking if Harry seemed well. He picked up the fourth letter. This one was from Ron, and it was 3 lines. Harry, mate, what is going on? Fred and George say you're apparently lord of everything now. Mum is having some kind of episode. Come to the burrow or write back immediately. Preferably come. Harry read all 4 letters again, methodically, then added Amelia Bones's to the pile with Sharpfang's documents. He wrote back to Hermione first, because Hermione would be the most useful immediately and because she was clearly going spare. He told her the relevant facts in order: the audit, the 11 houses, the ceremony, the guardianship, the blocked petition, and added, I know you have 12 questions. Write them all down. I need your brain on this. Then he wrote to Ron, I'll explain everything when I see you. Soon. Then he wrote to Amelia Bones, Grimmauld Place, London. Tomorrow at noon. I'll arrange access. He would need to sort that out with Sirius, but Sirius had been writing to him through a coded system involving Muggle Post and a secondary owl, and Harry could reach him through that. He wrote to Sirius last, and it was the most important letter, and he took the most time over it. He wrote, they blocked your pardon in 1994. Not the Wizengamot, 1 vote. Cast by a guardian who had authority over a house whose heir didn't know it existed. I want you to know that before anything else, because I want you to understand exactly what I'm working with here. He paused over the parchment. I have 11 houses now. I have legal standing I didn't have a week ago. I need Grimmauld Place to be the base of operations for the next few weeks, and I need you there with me, and I need you to trust me to know what I'm doing. I think I do. I need Amelia Bones to come to us because she's the one person in the ministry right now who might actually be straight with us, and I need her to meet you in person because a live Sirius Black is more useful than a theory of an innocent Sirius Black. I know that sounds cold. It's not cold. It's just true. Another pause. Don't do anything dramatic before I get there. Sirius. I mean it. He sent that one with Hedwig, who took it with the gravity the situation deserved. He sent the others with the 3 ministry owls, who were eating biscuits he'd left on the windowsill and had become considerably more cheerful. Then he packed his trunk, picked up Hedwig's empty cage, walked downstairs, and told Aunt Petunia he was leaving. Petunia was at the kitchen sink and didn't turn around. "Where?" "London." "When will you?" She stopped. Began again. Are you safe?" Harry looked at the back of her head, the set of her narrow shoulders, and thought about the fact that she'd grown up knowing about magic and spent her entire adult life pretending not to, and thought about Lily Evans who had been a half-blood who didn't know it and a witch who had died not knowing a lot of things. He said, "I'll be fine, Aunt Petunia." She nodded once, still not turning. "Then go." He went. Grim old place opened for him like a house that had been waiting. The door responded to the Potter ring the moment he touched the handle. He felt the wards shift and acknowledge, a cascade of recognitions moving through the building's old magic as the house identified the rings and recalibrated. Several locks that had required passwords before simply opened. A door at the end of the first-floor corridor that had always been sealed swung slightly ajar, as if inviting investigation. Sirius was in the kitchen, standing at the stove making something that smelled like it was mostly bacon, and turned around with an expression that attempted to stay casual and failed entirely. He looked at Harry's hands first, at the rings, and his face did something complicated and silent. 12 of those are mine, Harry said, because he knew Sirius sometimes needed jokes to get through large things. 11, Sirius said. Don't get greedy. His voice was slightly rough. He looked at Harry with the same specific attention that an architect looks at a finished building, measuring, checking, half disbelieving it all held together. Are you all right? I'm better than all right. Harry sat down at the kitchen table. I'm furious, but I'm better than all right. Those are compatible. Sirius turned back to the stove, which Harry understood meant he was doing something with his hands so he didn't have to manage his face. Your letter about the petition. Yes. I knew he blocked it. Sirius put a plate down in front of Harry with more force than strictly necessary. I didn't know how. I knew it went through, I knew it failed, I had Buckbeak find out through channels that it failed by 1 vote, and I spent about 3 months trying to figure out whose vote it was. House Peveril, Harry said. Voted against, as instructed by the magical guardian of record. Who is Dumbledore? Sirius sat down. He was very quiet for a moment, and Harry watched him work through it, not the anger, because Sirius had known about Dumbledore and choices for a long time, but the specific geometry of this particular betrayal, the precision of it. Finally Sirius said, he probably told himself it was for the greater good. That you needed to stay with Petunia for the blood wards and a cleared Sirius Black would be your legal guardian and would take you away. Yes, Harry said. That doesn't make it, no, Harry said. It doesn't. They ate in silence for a moment. Amelia Bones is coming tomorrow, Harry said. She's the best shot we have at getting you properly cleared quickly, and by quickly I mean in the next 2 weeks rather than the next 2 years. Harry, you've been living in this house for a year, Harry said, not unkindly. I want you out of it. That's not separate from everything else, it's part of it. The same system that blocked your pardon is the same one that kept my vault restricted and my houses dormant and blocked those 47 pieces of legislation. I'm going to pull on all of it at once, and your exoneration is the first thread. Sirius looked at him across the bacon and the cluttered kitchen table with the expression he'd had at the end of 3rd year, on the night they'd met properly, recognition, and grief, and something fiercer underneath both. You sound like James. I'm trying to sound like me, Harry said. That's what he always said too. But Sirius was almost smiling. They arrived the next afternoon in a tight cluster, Hermione first, because of course Hermione was first, with a bag so heavy with books that she listed slightly to the left, followed by Ron who was carrying 2 bags, one his and one evidently hers, and looking like someone had recently explained a complicated Quidditch rule to him and he was still deciding how he felt about it. Hermione walked into the kitchen, took one look at Harry's hands, set down her bag, sat down, and said, start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. I have a list. Hello to you too, Harry said. Hello. Now start from the beginning. Ron sat down next to her. He looked at the rings, at Harry's face, at the document spread on the kitchen table, at Harry's face again. He said, "You're different." "Am I?" "You're sitting different." Ron made a vague gesture. "You usually look like you're waiting for something bad to happen. You look like you're planning something instead." Harry thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "That's probably fair." He told them everything, in order. Hermione interrupted 17 times with specific questions, most of which he could answer and several of which sent her diving into her bag for books. Ron said almost nothing for the first half, and then, when Harry got to the part about the Sirius pardon petition, said, "That's," and stopped. Then, "Who had the right to," and stopped again. Then, finally, "That's genuinely rotten." "Yes," Harry said. "Are you angry?" "Yes." "Good," Ron said simply. "You should be." Hermione came up from a book with the expression that meant she'd found something. "Okay, so under the Wizengamot Charter of 1612, here, I've got it marked, a lord of a noble and ancient house has the right to demand an emergency session of the Wizengamot if they can demonstrate that their house's interests have been materially harmed by actions taken in their name without their knowledge or consent." "That's," she looked up. "Harry, that's almost exactly your situation. The proxy votes, the blocked legislation, all of it. You could call a session." "I was planning to," Harry said. She stared at him. "When did you? You've been here 2 days." "I've been reading Sharpfang's documents." "I've been reading those same documents and I only just found that clause." "You were also writing me a 12-question letter." 14 questions, actually, the last 2 I added after." She stopped. Narrowed her eyes. "You're enjoying this." "A little," Harry admitted. Ron looked between them and grinned despite himself. "Right, but what does an emergency session actually do? Do they have to listen?" "They have to convene," Hermione said, shifting back into lecture mode with evident relief. "They have to hear the complaint. They can't dismiss it procedurally without it being recorded in public. Which means Fudge can't quietly make it disappear," Harry finished. "It goes on record. Whatever happens in the session, the complaint and the evidence are public Wizengamot record. Which means the prophet can report on it." "You want the prophet to report on it?" Ron looked uncertain. "They've been awful about you." "They've been writing what Fudge wants them to write," Harry said. "But newspaper editors change their tune very quickly when the story that's being suppressed is more interesting than the story they're being paid to run." He paused. "I have another idea about that specifically, but first Amelia Bones gets here in an hour and we need to be ready." "Ready how?" Sirius called from the doorway. He'd been leaning there for the last few minutes, Harry noticed, listening with the specific expression of someone who kept expecting to need to intervene and kept finding they didn't. "Ready as in knowing what we want out of the meeting and what we're willing to give in exchange," Harry said. "Madam Bones wants information and she wants legal standing to act on it. We want Sirius cleared and we want access to a Wizengamot session. She can help with both and we can give her everything Gringotts gave us. But we don't hand it over for nothing, and we don't let her set the terms." Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Moody would have liked you." "Moody was a Death Eater in a box for a year last year," Harry said. "The real Moody. Who I actually knew." Sirius pushed off the doorframe. "I'll put the kettle on." Amelia Bones arrived exactly at noon, let through the Fidelius by Sirius after brief and somewhat stiff negotiations on the doorstep that Harry listened to from the stairs. She was a solidly built woman in her 50s with a monocle and gray-streaked hair pulled back without ceremony, and she walked into the house with the alertness of someone who spent their professional life reading rooms before entering them. Her eyes went immediately to Harry, then to his hands, then to Sirius, and there her expression did something complicated that she controlled quickly. "Mr. Black," she said. "Madam Bones," Sirius said. "Tea." Yes. Thank you. She sat at the kitchen table with the measured movement of someone who sat in difficult chairs during difficult meetings for a living, and looked at Harry directly. Lord Potter. Harry's fine, Harry said. I'm 15. Lord Potter, she said again, not unkindly, is a legal designation and in this context it matters. We should both remember what this meeting is. She looked at the documents on the table. Are those the Gringotts files? Most of them. May I? Harry slid the stack across. She read in silence for several minutes while Sirius made tea with the concentrated attention of someone occupying their hands for the same reason as before. Hermione and Ron were in the sitting room, pointedly not in the kitchen, which had been agreed upon as probably the right tactical choice. Amelia Bones read the document about the magical guardianship. She read the document about the blocked votes. She read the audit summary. She set them down, removed her monocle, polished it, replaced it, and said, "Do you know the position this puts me in?" "Yes," Harry said. "You're the head of the DMLE. You've just been handed documented evidence that a senior ministry official and the chief warlock of the Wizengamot colluded, even if unintentionally, to suppress a legitimate heir's inheritance, restrict his legal access to his own resources, and block legislation through fraudulent proxy voting for 14 years. You can't unknow it. You can either act on it officially, which makes you a target of every powerful person implicated, or ignore it, which makes you complicit." She looked at him steadily. "You're 15. You said that already. I'm reminding myself." She looked at the documents. "Who else has seen these?" "Sirius. My 2 friends in the other room." "You." Harry paused. "And Ragnarok, obviously, and his team. The ministry will have received the Gringotts notice of the inheritance claim by now, which is public record. But the guardianship details, the blocked votes, those are contained. For now." "For now," Harry agreed. "I intend to call an emergency Wizengamot session under the 1612 Charter. I'll be presenting the inheritance claim and formally taking my seats. At that point the blocked votes become part of the public Wizengamot record." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen so you can prepare for it." Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Sirius, who was setting down teacups with elaborate casualness. "How long has he been like this?" "Since I met him," Sirius said. "That's not," Harry started. "It really is," Sirius said pleasantly. Amelia Bones wrapped her hands around her teacup. "What do you want from me?" "2 things," Harry said. Sirius first. He was never given a trial. That's documented fact, not disputed, not gray area. There is no record of a trial because there never was one. Under DMLE procedure, a wrongful imprisonment discovered after the fact requires a formal review hearing, not a new trial. A review hearing can be expedited in cases where new evidence is overwhelming, she said quietly. "Yes. I want a review hearing within 2 weeks. Sirius testifies, Veritaserum offered voluntarily, Goblin law testimony on the inheritance chain that demonstrates Peter Pettigrew's status as the Potter's secret keeper. He had all of this from Sharpfang's research. I want you to chair it personally." Bones was quiet for a moment. "And the second thing?" "The emergency Wizengamot session. I want to know who's going to come in swinging on Fudge's behalf before I walk in there, so I know which way to point." She almost smiled. "You want intelligence." "I want intelligence," Harry confirmed. She looked at him for a long time. The house settled around them, the old, creaking sounds of Grimmauld Place doing its ancient thing, and somewhere upstairs something fell over with a muffled thump that was probably a portrait. Finally Amelia Bones said, "If I chair the review hearing, I need it to be airtight. The evidence needs to be incontestable. Pettigrew, is there any chance of finding him?" "He's with Voldemort," Harry said flatly. She didn't flinch. Most ministry officials flinched at the name, she didn't, and Harry noted it. Then we work with what we have. The lack of trial records alone should be sufficient for a review, particularly with Sirius's willingness to submit to Veritaserum. She looked at Sirius. You understand this means answering every question they put to you. Every single one, Sirius said. I've been waiting 12 years to answer questions in a room that was actually listening. Something moved in her expression. There and gone. Very well, she said. I'll initiate the review quietly. 2 weeks is aggressive but achievable. She looked back at Harry. The Wizengamot session, I can tell you that Fudge's primary allies are Umbridge, Dawlish, and surprisingly, Lucius Malfoy, who has been very active in the minister's circle since last year. The old family block, Nott, Parkinson, Avery, will follow Malfoy. That's your primary opposition. How many votes is that, roughly? 25. Out of roughly 200 voting members. She paused. Which sounds manageable until you factor in the neutrals who will follow whoever looks like they're winning. Then we need to look like we're winning before we walk in, Harry said. How? The Prophet. Harry folded his hands on the table. I'm going to give Rita Skeeter an exclusive interview. The silence that followed this had a very specific texture. Rita Skeeter, Sirius said, who wrote that you were a disturbed attention-seeking child looking for fame. Rita Skeeter, Harry said, who would sell her grandmother for a story that's bigger than anything she's ever run. 11 extinct houses, blocked legislation, fraudulent guardianship, wrongful imprisonment. She's going to take that story and she's going to run it, and she's going to run it hard, because Fudge has been giving his stories to Cuff and keeping her on the second page for 2 years. She's hungry and she's smart and she has leverage I have over her. Hermione appeared in the doorway. She'd clearly given up pretending not to listen approximately 20 minutes ago. The beetle, she said. The beetle, Harry agreed. Ron appeared behind Hermione. What beetle? Skeeter is an unregistered animagus, Hermione said. I found out at the end of last year. She's been using it to get stories she shouldn't have access to. It's illegal. So she does what we want or she faces charges, Ron said. She does what we want, Harry said, or we tell Madame Bones about an unregistered animagus. But I don't actually think it'll come to that. The story is good enough that she'll want it without coercion. The coercion is just insurance. Amelia Bones was looking at Harry with the expression of someone recalibrating continuously and finding the process unexpectedly exhausting. You have thought about this carefully. I've had a lot of time on my hands, Harry said. Dumbledore told me to stay at my aunt's house and not do anything. And you? I stayed, Harry said pleasantly. I just read a lot. Skeeter agreed to meet the following afternoon, which was slightly faster than Harry had expected and confirmed his read on her. She arrived at Grimmauld Place in her animagus form, a beetle, and transformed in the entryway with a flourish of leopard print robes that somehow managed to clash with everything in the hallway simultaneously. She had her quick quotes quill out before she sat down. Put it away, Harry said. We're doing this straight. You quote me accurately or we don't do it at all. She looked at him with sharp, calculating eyes. She looked at the rings. She looked at the documents on the table, he'd left them visible deliberately. He watched her eyes travel across the Gringotts audit summary and the legislative history and the magical guardianship documentation, and he watched her understand, piece by piece, what she was looking at. She put the quick quotes quill away. Produced a regular quill. Talk, she said. He talked for 2 hours. She took notes with a focused intensity that he'd never associated with her before. She asked sharp, precise questions that he answered directly, with documentation where applicable. She asked about Voldemort and he told her about the graveyard in the same flat, direct way he'd told Dumbledore, and he watched her understand that he wasn't performing it, that the evenness in his voice wasn't bravery or suppression but the particular steadiness that comes from having survived something and decided to face it straight. She asked about Cedric Diggory and he told her what had happened, and she went quiet for a moment, genuinely, unperformatively quiet. You understand, Harry said, toward the end, that this story runs as I've given it to you. No embellishment. No invented quotes. No sources close to. Every claim we've discussed is documented in these files, which Gringotts will confirm independently. And in exchange, she asked. She knew there was something. In exchange, Harry said, when the Wizengamot session happens, you have a press seat. Front row. Exclusive pre-session briefing from me directly. And the Animagus issue goes nowhere, Harry said. As long as the reporting is accurate. If you start making things up, Madam Bones gets a very interesting letter. Skeeter looked at him with something that was not quite respect and not quite fear and was closer to the expression of a chess player who has just realized their opponent has been 3 moves ahead since the beginning. You're nothing like what I wrote about you. No, Harry agreed. I'm not. That's actually a better story. I know. She left with her notes and her regular quill and her leopard print robes, and Ron watched her go from the doorway and said, that was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever sat through, and I once watched Percy give a speech for 45 minutes about cauldron thickness regulations. Did it work? Hermione asked. Harry looked at the empty doorway. Give her 2 days, he said. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, the Daily Prophet landed on every doorstep in Wizarding Britain with a front page that took up the entire above the fold and featured a heading in the largest typeface the paper had used in 20 years, The Forgotten Lord, How Harry Potter's Birthright Was Hidden, His Guardian Silenced His Votes, and the Ministry Knew Nothing, an exclusive. By Rita Skeeter. All facts independently verified. Documentation available at Gringotts Bank. Harry sat in the Grimmauld Place kitchen and drank his tea and waited for the owls to start arriving. They started arriving at 7:15. By 10 o'clock there were 43 letters. 3 were from members of the Wizengamot requesting meetings. 2 were from families whose names appeared in the blocked legislation records. 1 was from Dumbledore, long, thoughtful, and carefully not an apology, which told Harry more than an apology would have. 1 was from Fudge, through official ministry channels, 3 lines, demanding Harry cease what it described as a campaign of deliberate misinformation. Harry put that one on the stack with the others, where it looked very small. 1 final letter arrived just before noon, on parchment that crinkled with age, written in a hand that shook very slightly with age and carried the seal of a house Harry recognized from Sharpfang's documents as one of the oldest neutral families in the Wizengamot. It said, Lord Potter. We have been waiting 40 years for someone to pull on that particular thread. We are with you. Harry read it twice, then showed it to Sirius, who read it and laughed, a real laugh, the kind Sirius didn't do enough of, and clapped Harry on the shoulder. Right then, Sirius said. What's next? Harry looked at the pile of letters. He looked at the rings. He thought about the Wizengamot seats, 11 of them plus Potter, sitting in a row, empty for centuries and waiting for someone with enough reason to fill them. We file for the emergency session, Harry said. And then we wait for Fudge to make a mistake. Sirius grinned. How long do you think that'll take? About 4 days, Harry said. He's already scared. Scared people move fast and don't look where they're going. He was right about the 4 days. He was right about Fudge not looking where he was going. But the shape of the mistake, when it came, was larger than Harry had predicted, and considerably more useful. Chapter 3, The shape of what was taken. The Wizengamot filing went in on a Monday morning, delivered by Ragnarok's personal courier, a goblin named Steelclaw who had the bearing of someone who had delivered uncomfortable documents to powerful people for decades and found the work deeply fulfilling. Harry signed the petition with the Potter ring seal and watched Steelclaw tuck it into a document case that locked with blood magic and left without another word. That's it? Ron asked, watching from the doorway. That's it, Harry said. It's filed. They have 10 business days to schedule the session or they're in breach of the 1612 Charter, which Sharpfang tells me hasn't actually happened in recorded history because the political fallout would be catastrophic. So they'll schedule it. They'll schedule it and they'll spend every minute between now and then trying to figure out how to manage it. Harry picked up his tea. Let them try. The response from the Wizengamot administrator's office arrived that same afternoon, which was faster than the 10-day window by 9.5 days, which told Harry something useful about how much attention the petition was getting. The session was scheduled for 2 weeks hence, on the 28th. The notice was formal, correct, and entirely without the kind of procedural obstruction he'd half expected, which meant either that Fudge hadn't gotten to the administrator yet or that the administrator had decided, wisely, not to be on the wrong side of this. What arrived the same evening, through a less official channel, was a note from Amelia Bones. The minister has called 3 closed meetings in the last 48 hours. Umbridge has been in his office for most of the morning. I don't know what they're planning, but I know they're planning something. Be ready. Harry pinned that to the cork board he'd established on one wall of the first-floor study, a room that had been full of black family documents and dark artifacts when they'd arrived, and which Sirius had cleared with the specific vengeful enthusiasm of someone who'd wanted to do it for years. The cork board now held a map of the relevant players, the legislative history, the timeline of Sirius's case, and the Gringotts documents in an order that made sense to Harry and which Hermione had reorganized twice before acknowledging that his original order was, in fact, logical. 3 days after the filing, Hermione came downstairs at 7 a.m. with red eyes and a very particular look on her face that Harry had learned to associate with the discovery of something that made her genuinely upset rather than academically troubled. She sat down at the kitchen table and put a book in front of Harry. It was old, properly old, the kind of old where the pages had gone the color of old teeth and the binding had separated from the spine and been reattached with what appeared to be magical adhesive that had itself aged. It was open to a page marked with a piece of ribbon, and the heading read, Magical Guardianship, Powers, Limitations, and Historical Abuses. Chapter 7, The Correspondence Clause. Read from the marked paragraph, she said. Harry read. The relevant section explained that a magical guardian, under the original 1836 Guardianship Act, had the legal authority to intercept, redirect, or suppress correspondence addressed to their ward if they could demonstrate, to their own satisfaction, not to any external body, not to any review board, to their own satisfaction, that the correspondence represented a threat to the ward's safety or well-being. There was no appeal mechanism. There was no documentation requirement. The guardian simply acted, and there was no record made. Harry looked up from the page. He could have been blocking letters for years, Hermione said. Not just vault access and Wizengamot votes. Letters. From anyone. And there's no way to know because there's no record. The kitchen was very quiet. Letters from who? Ron said carefully, from his corner of the table. He'd clearly been awake for a while too. Anyone who tried to contact Harry before he got to Hogwarts, Hermione said. Her voice was controlled in the specific way that meant she was very angry and managing it deliberately. Any magical person who knew about him and wrote. She stopped. Steadied. Did anyone ever try to write to you? Before Hogwarts? Harry thought about a cupboard under stairs and a complete absence of anything addressed to him. He thought about how the first Hogwarts letter arriving had felt, the specific, alien shock of his own name on an envelope. He said, I don't know. I never got anything. That might not mean no one wrote. No, Harry said. It might not. He picked up the book and read the correspondence clause again, more carefully this time. There was a footnote at the bottom of the page that Hermione had underlined in pencil. The clause was challenged in 1902 by the family of one Thomas Avenham, a wizard who had been kept isolated from the broader magical community by a guardian who subsequently embezzled from the estate. The challenge failed on technical grounds. The clause has not been successfully challenged since. Can we find out? Harry asked. Gringotts might have records, Hermione said. If letters were sent to you through the wizarding post system, there's a delivery record held by the Owl Office. It's not usually accessible but, I'm Lord of 11 Houses, Harry said. I have legal standing to request records that concern my estate. He stood up. I'll write to Sharp Fong. Harry. Hermione's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression she used when she had something to say that she wasn't sure how to say, which was unusual enough to make him wait. Whatever's in those records, it might be things that are hard to find out. People who tried to reach you and couldn't. People who, she stopped. I just want you to be prepared. Hermione, Harry said. My parents are dead and I grew up in a cupboard. I've been hard to prepare for most of my life. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact, because it was one. Whatever it is, I'd rather know than not know. She nodded once. He went to write the letter. 2 days later, Sirius's solicitor, a witch named Marchbanks who was no relation to the examiner of the same name and who had the energy of someone who'd been waiting for this particular case to become actionable for an embarrassingly long time, arrived at Grimmauld Place to begin preparing the review hearing file. She was small, fast-moving, and had the quality of paying such complete attention to everything you said that being in a room with her was slightly intense. She sat across from Sirius in the first-floor study and asked him questions in a methodical, unhurried way that covered the night of the Potters' deaths, the immediate aftermath, his arrest, and the absence of trial, and she wrote everything down in a looping shorthand that filled pages faster than seemed mechanically possible. Harry sat in the corner with a book, there partly to support Sirius and partly because, as the person whose inheritance documents had triggered the legal chain that made this hearing possible, he technically had a standing interest in the proceedings. When she got to the part about Peter Pettigrew, Sirius told her everything, the secret keeper switch, the street confrontation, Pettigrew's staged death, all of it, in a steady voice that only roughened slightly when he described the 12 muggles. Marchbanks wrote without reaction. Then she looked up and said, "Is there any living witness who can corroborate the secret keeper arrangement?" Remus Lupin, Sirius said. He knew about the switch. He wasn't there when it happened, but James told him. Where is he? I can find him, Harry said from the corner. Marchbanks looked at him. You're very quiet over there. I'm listening, Harry said. What do you need from me, Lord Potter? Regarding this case specifically. I need the hearing to be watertight, Harry said. Not just legally sufficient, I need it to be the kind of case that makes it impossible for anyone to claim it was rushed or politically motivated or insufficiently examined. Because the people who are going to come at it will use all of those arguments. He paused. I also need it to be fast. 2 weeks. Marchbanks looked at Sirius. Veritaserum? Voluntarily offered, Sirius said. For any question they want to ask. She nodded. I can build this case in 2 weeks. It will be long days. She looked at Harry again. The inheritance documentation, the Gringotts records, they establish the context for why this matters legally, beyond simple wrongful imprisonment. They demonstrate that Mr. Black's incarceration had downstream consequences for your estate. That adds a layer of legal standing that strengthens the petition considerably. I know, Harry said. You knew that before I said it. Yes. She looked at him for a moment with the same recalibrating expression Amelia Bones had used, which Harry was beginning to recognize as his standard effect on adults who had expected a 15-year-old. Very well, she said. Let's get to work. The Owl Post delivery records from the Wizarding Postal Office arrived from Gringotts on a Friday, inside a sealed case that Sharp Fong had attached a note to. These are the full records. I have reviewed them first. I would advise reading them with someone you trust present. Harry read Sharp Fang's note twice, and then showed it to Sirius, and then took the case to the study where Sirius and Hermione and Ron were already gathered around the cork board having a discussion about the Wizengamot session strategy. He opened it on the desk. The records were organized chronologically, beginning in 1981. Wizarding Post records worked on a simple principle. Every letter sent through the system generated an entry noting sender, recipient, and delivery status. Delivered meant what it said. Redirected meant it had been intercepted. Held meant it was sitting in the Guardian's possession. The entries for Harry James Potter, recipient, began in 1981 and continued through 1991. The first 2 years were sparse, a handful of letters from Order members and old friends of his parents checking on him, all marked redirected with the notation Guardian Directive, Ward Protection. Then a gap. Then, in 1983, a cluster of letters from someone named Algernon Croker, all redirected. In 1984, 3 letters from a name Harry didn't recognize, Charles Potter, which made Sirius go very still beside him. In 1985, letters from Augusta Longbottom. In 1986, from Andromeda Tonks. In 1987, from someone who had signed their letters only as RL, which Harry didn't need long to identify. He looked up at Sirius. Sirius's jaw was set. His hands were very flat on the desk. "Remus wrote to you," he said quietly. "Every year. From 1982. And got redirected," Harry said. He thought. Sirius stopped. When he spoke again his voice was rougher. "He thought you didn't want contact with the wizarding world. He told me, in 3rd year. He said he tried once and gotten no response and assumed the Dursleys were keeping you away from it deliberately, or that you'd been told not to respond. He looked at the records. He didn't know it never reached you." Harry looked at the entry for Remus Lupin, 1982. Then 1983. Then 1984, all the way to 1991, when the record switched from redirected to delivered, Hogwarts postal system because at that point Harry was at school and outside the domestic ward's intercept range. 10 years of letters. All of them sitting in Dumbledore's possession, or destroyed, or, what had been done with them. "We can add it to the list," Hermione said. Her voice was carefully steady. She was doing the same thing Harry was, keeping herself level by focusing on the actionable. "I'm not adding it to the list," Harry said. She looked at him. "I'm not treating this as a line item," Harry said. "This is a different conversation. This is for later, when I'm sitting in front of Dumbledore, and it's not for the Wizengamot or the press. It's for him." He looked at the records for a moment longer. "He owes me a real conversation. Not a careful one." Nobody argued with that. Ron said, quietly, "My mum wrote too." He was pointing at an entry in 1990, Molly Weasley, redirected. "She must have heard about you somehow and," he stopped. Cleared his throat. "She never mentioned it. She probably thought," "Yeah," Harry said. A moment of silence settled over the room that was the specific kind of silence that happens when people are all sitting with something large and personal and have collectively decided not to make it bigger than it already is. Harry closed the file. "Right," he said. "What else do we have on the Wizengamot prep?" The letter from Hogwarts arrived the same week, from McGonagall, not Dumbledore, which Harry noted. It was warm and careful and mentioned that she was very pleased to hear of the inheritance findings and wished him well, and contained in a postscript something that was not quite a warning and not quite advice. "I would caution you, Harry, to approach the coming weeks with the full understanding that not everything that was done without care for you. Some things were done wrongly and some things were done out of fear, and the two are not always the same thing. I think you know that. But I wanted to say it." Harry sat with that letter for a while. Then he wrote back, "I know, Professor. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I'm trying to build something. There's a difference." She wrote back within a day, "Yes. There is." Good. That exchange mattered to him more than he'd expected. He put her letter in the desk drawer rather than on the corkboard. The thing about waiting for Fudge to make a mistake was that you had to do it without flinching when the lesser provocations came first. On a Wednesday, 10 days before the Wizengamot session, an unsigned editorial appeared in the Daily Prophet, which meant it was from someone with enough influence that the Prophet would run it without a byline, suggesting that the recent inheritance claims by Harry Potter were suspiciously timed and potentially motivated by unknown political interests, and raising questions about the validity of blood magic testing when conducted by an institution with historical tensions with the ministry. Ron threw the paper across the kitchen. They're calling Gringotts liars. They're not calling Gringotts liars, Harry said. They're creating the idea that maybe Gringotts might possibly have some reason to be less than fully accurate, so that people who want an excuse to doubt the findings have one. He spread the paper flat and read the editorial again. This is Umbridge. Look at the sentence structure. Hermione leaned over and read. Then she looked up. That's, yes, actually. The passive construction and the repeated qualifying phrases. She writes like she talks. What do we do about it? Sirius asked. Nothing immediately, Harry said. It's noise. If we respond to the noise, we look defensive. The documentation stands on its own. Let Skeeter handle it. He sent Skeeter a short note, see today's editorial. Your thoughts? Skeeter's reply arrived within the hour, already writing. Do you have anything specific you want me to say? Harry wrote back, ask the prophet who approved an anonymous editorial attacking a Goblin bank's methodology without requesting comment from the bank. Ask them if they typically print claims without sourcing. Ask them if they'd like to be the paper that publicly accused Gringotts of fraud and what the legal implications of that might be. The next day's Prophet featured a full-page article by Skeeter on journalistic standards, anonymous editorials, and a brief but absolutely pointed history of the legal consequences of making unsupported claims against Gringotts. The editorial didn't appear again. On Thursday, Dawlish, one of Fudge's hit wizards, the one Amelia Bones had mentioned as an ally, appeared at the Grimmauld Place exterior wards with an official-looking document claiming to be from the improper use of magic office, requesting Harry present himself for questioning regarding underage magical activity. Harry didn't go to the door. He sent Marchbanks. Marchbanks spoke to Dawlish through the ward-sealed door for approximately 4 minutes, during which Harry could hear her voice but not the words, but the cadence was unmistakable, the particular rhythm of a solicitor who has found a procedural error and is enjoying explaining it carefully. Dawlish left. Marchbanks came back in and said, without visible emotion, the notice was incorrectly filed under the 1988 code rather than the 1993 revision, which means it's not legally binding, and additionally you have not performed any underage magic at this address in the relevant period, which I confirmed with the ministry's own tracking records before I came to the door, so I simply told him to try again with the correct paperwork. She paused. He seemed frustrated. Thank you, Harry said. It's what you're paying me for, she said, already moving back to the study. These were the minor moves, the probing attacks, the Fudge administration feeling out the terrain before committing to anything larger. Harry watched each one and waited. The real mistake came on a Sunday. Amelia Bones arrived at Grimmauld Place at 9 in the morning with the expression of someone who had been awake for most of the night and had not improved their mood by doing so. She sat down, declined tea, and said, Fudge issued an emergency ministry decree last night. After midnight. Decree number 31, emergency suspension of ancient house claims pending ministry review. Harry looked at her. Fudge has attempted, she said carefully, to pass a decree that suspends all recently filed ancient house inheritance claims, specifically those filed under the Treaty of Ironhold, pending a ministry review board examination of their validity. The decree is signed by him as minister and co-signed by Umbridge as undersecretary. She paused. It was filed at 1:17 in the morning. Can he do that? Ron asked. No, Harry and Hermione said simultaneously. No, Amelia Bones confirmed. He cannot. The Treaty of Ironhold was ratified in 1867 and governs Goblin-Wizard relations at a level above standard ministry decree. A minister cannot unilaterally suspend treaty obligations by emergency decree. It requires a full Wizengamot vote of at least 2/3 majority. She looked at Harry. He either doesn't know that or he hoped to move fast enough that nobody would challenge it before the Wizengamot session. How many people have seen the decree? Harry asked. The overnight filing team at the ministry. Me, because I have standing access to all emergency filings. Fudge's office. Ragnarok, Because Gringotts has treaty monitoring charms that flag any ministry action touching the Ironhold Accords, they triggered at 1:23 in the morning. She sat back. Ragnarok is, not pleased. I imagine not, Harry said. What is Ragnarok doing? Drafting a formal protest to be delivered to the minister this morning, with copies to the Wizengamot administrator and the International Confederation of Wizards, since the Treaty of Ironhold has international signatories. Amelia Bones looked at Harry with the expression of someone watching pieces fall into place and finding the pattern troubling in its precision. You expected something like this. I expected something, Harry said. I didn't know the shape of it. He stood up. This is better than I expected. Better? He's panicking, Harry said. A midnight decree, filed without Wizengamot approval, that directly violates an international treaty. That's not a calculated political move. That's someone who got to Sunday night and decided he needed to do something drastic before Monday morning. Harry moved to the window, looking out at the grey London morning. He's scared of what I'm going to say in that session and he's trying to make it go away before I can say it. The problem, Amelia Bones said slowly, is that even an illegal decree causes disruption while it's being challenged. It creates uncertainty. Some people will act as if it's valid simply because it's ministry signed. Not if it's publicly identified as illegal within 24 hours, Harry said. He turned from the window. I need to talk to Ragnarok today. Can you come? I can. But Harry, going to Gringotts today, publicly, in the middle of a ministry decree controversy, yes, Harry said. Publicly. She understood. He watched her understand. You want to be seen. I want Fudge to know that his decree didn't make me stay home, Harry said. I want every person who read about the decree this morning, and they will read about it, because Skeeter is going to find out about it by noon, to see me walking into Gringotts like nothing has changed. Because nothing has changed. His decree is illegal and I know it and he knows I know it. He picked up his jacket. What's the fastest way to get the decree officially designated as invalid? Ragnarok files the treaty protest, Amelia Bones said. I file a DMLE challenge on the grounds of improper procedure. With both challenges filed, the decree cannot be enforced while under review. The Wizengamot administrator is required by law to acknowledge the suspension of enforcement within 6 hours of both filings. Can you file within the hour? I already have, she said. I drafted it in the car. Harry looked at her and felt the particular warm regard you feel for someone who turns out to be exactly who you thought they were. Thank you, Madam Bones. Don't thank me, she said, with something that was almost dry humor. Just win. The walk to Gringotts, they took the fleur to the Leaky Cauldron and walked up Diagon Alley from there, drew attention from the moment Harry stepped through the Leaky into the alley. People stopped. People pointed. People whispered in clusters, and Harry heard fragments. That's him, 11 houses, did you see the prophet, the ministry decree, he's here, he's actually. Harry walked at a normal pace, hands visible, 11 rings catching what morning sun was making it through the clouds, and he didn't look at the clusters of people or acknowledge the whispers. He walked like someone going somewhere with purpose, which he was. Sirius was beside him, Sirius who had not been on Diagon Alley for a year, who was technically still a wanted man until Marchbanks's review hearing happened, and who had made this decision this morning over Harry's mild objection with the argument, if they try to take me, they do it in front of everyone in the alley and it becomes the next headline. Either way it helps. Which Harry had thought was reckless and also strategically sound, and had stopped arguing. Hermione and Ron flanked them, which had not been planned but which Harry appreciated in the specific way you appreciate people who position themselves where they're useful without being told. They reached Gringotts. The guards at the door, goblins in uniform, straight and formal, looked at Harry's hands and stepped aside with a precision that felt like a statement. Inside, Ragnarok was waiting. Not in a side room, not in the corridor to the estate department. In the main hall. Standing in the center of the marble floor with Sharpfang and Goldthorn and 4 other goblins Harry didn't know, all of them in formal Gringotts grey, all of them carrying document cases. In the main hall, where every witch and wizard conducting their morning banking business could see clearly that Gringotts was receiving Harry Potter with the kind of reception that did not happen for ordinary customers. Harry walked across the marble floor and shook Ragnarok's hand. Ragnarok had a very firm handshake. "We received the decree," Ragnarok said, his voice carrying in the acoustics of the hall. "I heard," Harry said. "Is the protest filed?" "Filed at 8:47 this morning with copies to the Wizengamot Administrator, the ICW, the British Ministry of Magic directly, and," Ragnarok said, with the particular satisfaction of someone playing a card they've been holding for some time, "the French Ministry of Magic, as House Beaumont's French holdings make this a bilateral treaty matter." "The French Ministry," Harry said. "Complications for the British minister multiply when other sovereign magical governments become involved," Ragnarok said blandly. "The French ministry has already sent an official inquiry. The Spanish have sent a solidarity statement. The Italians are drafting." "The Italians," Hermione murmured, with naked admiration. "House Beaumont had extensive Italian connections in the 16th century, Ragnarok said. He looked at Harry. "I should mention that the decree has also triggered a clause in the Treaty of Ironhold that we invoke very rarely, not because it's not applicable but because the situation requiring it has not arisen in 140 years. He gestured toward the corridor. "Walk with me." They walked, the goblins and Harry and his friends moving through the bank with the fluid momentum of a group that had something important to do, and Ragnarok said, as they walked, "The 1867 treaty includes a clause, Article 19, which states that any attempt by the British ministry to unilaterally invalidate treaty-protected goblin recognitions triggers an automatic freeze on all ministry-controlled Gringotts accounts pending resolution of the dispute." Harry stopped walking. "Ministry accounts," he said. "Operational accounts. Payroll. Departmental funding." Ragnarok kept moving, and Harry started again. "The ministry cannot pay its employees, fund its departments, or access its reserve accounts while Article 19 is active. I sent them a letter informing them of this at 8:51 this morning." Harry thought about Fudge reading that letter. He thought about Fudge having been awake until 1 in the morning filing a decree he thought would solve his problem, and then at 9 in the morning receiving a letter from Gringotts explaining that his decree had instead frozen the entire ministry's bank access. He felt something that wasn't quite sympathy. "How long can you maintain that?" Harry asked. "Until the decree is officially withdrawn," Ragnarok said. "Or until the Wizengamot votes to override the treaty, which requires a 2/3 majority and 7 days' notice." He paused. "I would not describe the current composition of the Wizengamot as likely to produce a 2/3 majority for anything Fudge proposes in the next 7 days." "No," Harry agreed. "I wouldn't either." They were still at Gringotts at 2 in the afternoon when Amelia Bones's Patronus, a large badger that moved with total certainty through the stone corridors of the bank as if the building had been expecting it, found Harry and said, in Bones's voice, crisp and factual, "The decree has been withdrawn. Fudge's office sent formal withdrawal notice to my department at 1:43. The ministry accounts have been unfrozen. The Wizengamot session remains on schedule for the 28th. I expect you'll be hearing from the minister's office shortly. Do not respond without your solicitor present." It dissolved. Harry looked at the space where it had been. Hermione said, quietly, "He withdrew it in under 6 hours." "He had no choice," Harry said. "His staff couldn't be paid and 3 foreign governments were involved." He looked at the wall, at the Gringotts torch casting its steady light. "But the withdrawal doesn't undo the fact that he tried it. That's still on record. That's still something that happened." "And Skeeter?" Ron asked. "Has definitely heard about it by now," Harry said. "She has sources in the ministry. She's going to run the decree, the withdrawal, the goblin response, the foreign inquiries, all of it." He paused. "And she's going to ask, because she's very good at this, why the Minister of Magic would attempt an illegal midnight decree to stop a 15-year-old boy from claiming his inheritance. He said it plainly, as a fact. A 15-year-old boy. He said it because making it sound like what it was, absurd, panicked, the action of someone who had already lost control of the situation, was more useful than saying anything complicated. Harry. Sirius's voice was quiet. Harry turned. Sirius was standing in the corridor with his hands in his pockets and an expression that Harry had learned to read as the one where something important was close to the surface. When you walk into that Wizengamot session, 11 houses, rings, everything, are you ready for the fact that some of those people are going to be genuinely afraid of you? Good, Harry said. That's not, Sirius. Harry looked at his godfather. They should have been more afraid of me a long time ago. Not of my power, not of what I might do, afraid of what happened when they assumed I could be kept small and managed and grateful. That's what they should have been afraid of. That I'd notice. He paused. I've noticed. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yeah. Okay. I'm not going in there to frighten people, Harry said. I'm going in there to do the job. But if some of them are uncomfortable, that's because they should be. He looked at his hands, the rings, 11 of them, on the fingers of a 15-year-old who'd grown up in a cupboard. I spent 4 years at Hogwarts being told I was brave for surviving things I should never have had to survive. I'm done surviving. I want to actually do something. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Something passed between them that was the shorthand of two people who'd watched their friend for 4 years and had always suspected this was in there and were now watching it come out in full daylight and were, in some essential way, simply glad. Right then, Ron said. What do we do for the next 10 days? Harry looked at the document case in his hands, the Wizengamot prep notes, the legislative history, the blocked votes, the evidence that had been sitting dormant and waiting for him to be old enough to do something with it. He thought about 47 pieces of legislation. 29 blocked. He thought about Sirius's face when Harry had said I want you out of this house. We prepare, Harry said. And we do it properly. He moved toward the stairs, and the others fell in around him, Hermione already opening a book, Ron already arguing with her about which part was most important, Sirius walking with a lightness Harry had not seen in him before. The kind of lightness that comes from having something to walk toward. Above them, distantly, Gringotts went about its vast, ancient business of keeping accounts. Everything was building. Something enormous was coming, and it was coming because Harry had finally decided to let it. He sat up late that night in the Grimmauld Place study, all the documents around him, the cork board in front of him, the rings warm and quiet on his fingers. He wrote in the margins of the legislative summaries, made notes about who would argue what, thought through every objection and how to answer it. He wasn't frightened. He wasn't even particularly nervous. He was ready. And somewhere in the ministry, in a large office with a lime green bowler hat hanging on a hook, Cornelius Fudge sat behind his desk and looked at the withdrawal notice he'd signed and the growing stack of international correspondence and the latest edition of the Prophet, Skeeter's piece on the decree running above the fold with the heading Minister's Midnight Decree triggers international crisis. What is Fudge afraid of? And tried very hard to think of a way out. He couldn't find one. That was the problem with pulling on a thread that had been fixed in place for 14 years. Once it started moving, it didn't stop just because you were frightened. It stopped when everything had come undone. Chapter 4, Fudge makes a mistake. The morning of Sirius's review hearing was cold for August, the kind of damp grey that London specialised in as a reminder that summer was always conditional. Harry was up at 5:30, which was not unusual for him anymore, and had already read through Marchbanks's case summary twice by the time Sirius came downstairs at 6 looking like someone who had either not slept or slept too hard and couldn't tell the difference. Sirius sat down across from Harry without speaking. Harry poured him tea. They sat in companionable quiet for several minutes, which was, Harry had discovered, one of the better things about Sirius. He didn't feel the need to fill silence with reassurance, which meant that when he did say something it was worth hearing. Last night, Sirius said finally, I kept thinking about what happens if it goes wrong. It won't, Harry said. Hear me out. Sirius wrapped both hands around the mug. I've spent 12 years being certain that if I ever got in front of anyone who was actually listening, they'd have to see it. They'd have to. And I still believe that. But I've also spent 12 years watching what certainty costs you when reality doesn't match it. He looked up. I need to know you have a contingency. If the review fails, Harry said, which it won't, but if it does, we have the full documentation from Marchbanks on file with Gringotts as a protected record. We have Remus's testimony in writing, signed and witnessed. We have the absence of trial record, which is not something anyone can manufacture. We go to the ICW and we argue the wrongful imprisonment on human rights grounds, which is an avenue Marchbanks says is entirely viable. He paused. And I have 11 Wizengamot seats, which means that when the session happens in 8 days I can propose a formal Wizengamot inquiry that supersedes the ministry review process entirely. He met Sirius's eyes. There is no version of this where you stay in that house for the rest of your life. I need you to understand that. Sirius was quiet. Outside, the first starlings of the morning were starting up in the square. Then he said, you know what's funny? James used to do this. When I was spiraling, he'd just lay it out. Here are the facts. Here is the plan. Nothing was ever as catastrophic as my brain made it at 5 in the morning. How often did that work? Harry asked. Most of the time. Sirius almost smiled. Once he told me to shut up and go back to sleep, and that was also very effective. Shut up and go back to sleep, Harry said. It's 6 in the morning. Then shut up and drink your tea. Sirius laughed, the real one, the good one, and drank his tea. The review hearing was held in a small chamber in the DMLE wing of the ministry, not in the main Wizengamot courtroom, which Marchbanks had specifically requested and Amelia Bones had approved. The main courtroom carried too much history, too much weight, and strategically they wanted a room that felt procedural rather than theatrical. This was a fact-finding hearing. They wanted it to feel like one. Harry wasn't permitted inside. He sat on a bench in the corridor outside with Hermione on one side and Ron on the other, and the corridor was ministry beige and smelled of floor wax and old parchment, and Harry thought it was probably the least dramatic-looking place in which something this important had ever happened. Hermione had brought a book but wasn't reading it. She kept turning pages and then turning them back. Ron had brought nothing and was sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring at the opposite wall with the concentrated expression of someone who had decided the only useful thing he could do right now was exist solidly. He'll be fine, Hermione said, at one point. I know, Harry said. Marchbanks is excellent. I know. Madame Bones is chairing it personally and she's already read everything through, Hermione, Harry said. Yes. I know. She stopped turning pages. I'm nervous and talking is helping. I know that too, Harry said. Talk about something else. The Wizengamot session, she said immediately, and Harry felt Ron visibly relax beside him at the return to something tactical. I've been thinking about the order of presentation. You've got 11 houses, 47 pieces of legislation, the guardianship, and the blocked pardon. It's a lot to put in front of people at once. There's a risk of overwhelming the chamber to the point where the individual items lose their impact. That's why we lead with Sirius, Harry said. Not today, because today is the hearing, but in the Wizengamot session. If the review goes right, when it goes right, Sirius will be exonerated before the session. So we lead with him as the concrete, human example of what the institutional failures cost. Someone they can look at, someone real, 13 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit. Then the legislation. Then the guardianship last, because the guardianship is complicated and people will want to reach for it as a reason to sympathize with Dumbledore instead of focusing on the structural problem. Hermione was nodding. Save the most complicated thing for when they're already engaged. And when the case is already made, Harry said. I don't need them to condemn Dumbledore. I need them to understand that the system allowed it to happen and the system needs to change. Fudge will try to make it about you personally, Ron said. He'd shifted to look at Harry. He always does that. Makes it about whether you're trustworthy or stable or, let him, Harry said. Every time he tries to make it about me, he's not defending his actual record. And his actual record is what's on trial. Ron thought about that. When did you get good at politics? I'm not good at politics, Harry said. I'm good at recognizing when someone is lying and knowing why. The politics is just what you do with that. Ron looked at him for a moment. That's literally what politics is, mate. Harry opened his mouth to argue and then closed it again. The door to the hearing room opened at 11:43, which was 2 hours and 12 minutes after it had closed, and Marchbanks came out first with the deliberately measured pace of someone keeping their expression professional until they were clear of the official setting, and then Sirius came out behind her and his face was undone in the way that faces go when something has been held together very tightly for a very long time and the reason to hold it suddenly lifts. Harry stood up. Sirius crossed the corridor in 3 steps and pulled Harry into a hug that had several years of Azkaban and 12 years of wrongful imprisonment and a great deal of stubborn, complicated love in it, and Harry hugged him back and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that was bigger than the fact of it. Cleared? Ron asked, over Harry's shoulder. Marchbanks said, with precise professional satisfaction, Mr. Black has been formally exonerated of all charges, his record expunged, and Madam Bones has referred the matter of Peter Pettigrew's fake death and subsequent fugitive status to the DMLE Active Investigation Division. Additionally, the Wizengamot will be formally notified of the exoneration prior to the session on the 28th, as is required when a wrongful imprisonment is discovered. She paused. Mr. Black is also, as of today, entitled to full compensation from the Ministry for 13 years of wrongful imprisonment, which I will be pursuing separately with considerable enthusiasm. Sirius pulled back from Harry and looked at him with red-edged eyes and said, You absolute menace. You said I could stay at your house, Harry said. You didn't specify conditions. I'm going to make you do the washing up for a month. Fine, Harry said. Come on. Let's go home. They celebrated that night at Grimmauld Place with food that Sirius cooked with the energy of someone who had just remembered he was allowed to enjoy things, and Remus Lupin arrived at 7 looking slightly stunned. Harry had sent him a note 3 days ago, brief and factual, explaining the exoneration timeline and asking him to come, and stood in the kitchen doorway with a traveling cloak still on and an expression that suggested he'd read the note 4 times and still not fully believed it. Sirius turned around from the stove and said, Moony. Remus said, You're, and stopped. Cleared, Sirius said. As of 11:43 this morning. Sit down before you fall over. Remus sat down. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back at him, at this man who had written to him every year for 10 years and never gotten an answer, and said, I know about the letters. Remus went very still. I know you wrote, Harry said. I know they never reached me. I know you assumed I didn't want contact. He kept his voice level, not because he wasn't moved but because being moved and being clear weren't mutually exclusive. I want you to know they didn't reach me. None of them. Remus was quiet for a long moment. Something worked in his face that he didn't try to hide. I know what you thought, Harry said. It was the wrong thing but it was an understandable wrong thing. You had no reason to know it was being intercepted. He paused. I want to actually know you. If that's something you want. Remus looked at him, and then at Sirius, and then back at Harry, with the expression of someone being offered something they had given up expecting and wasn't sure yet how to hold. Yes, he said. I want that. Good, Harry said. Then sit down and eat. Sirius is showing off. I'm not showing off, Sirius said, from the stove. You made 4 separate courses, Hermione said. That's just cooking. Sirius, you made a soufflé. The evening was warm and loud and full of the kind of laughter that happens when people are genuinely relieved rather than just happy, which has a different quality, looser, less polished, occasionally too loud. Ron and Fred and George argued about Quidditch. Hermione and Remus discovered immediately that they were the same kind of reader and had an intense conversation in the corner that nobody else fully understood. Sirius sat at the head of the table and looked around the room with the expression of someone who keeps checking to make sure it's real. Harry watched it and thought, this is what should have happened years ago. He kept the thought brief because sitting in should have was a luxury he didn't have time for. But he let himself have the moment. Then he went to the study and worked on his Wizengamot speech for 2 more hours, because there were 7 days left and it wasn't ready yet. The next morning brought Fudge's second mistake. This one wasn't a midnight decree. It was worse than that, in a way, because it came dressed as something reasonable. Arthur Weasley arrived at Grimmauld Place at 8, slightly flushed from walking fast, with a copy of an internal ministry memo he technically shouldn't have taken home but had with the expression of a man who had stopped caring about technical shouldn'ts approximately 2 days ago. He spread it on the kitchen table. It was a memo from the office of the minister, circulated to all department heads, notifying them that the ministry was pursuing an emergency legal review of the Treaty of Ironhold's domestic application clauses, with specific attention to whether the treaty's inheritance provisions were compatible with current wizarding law. The review was to be conducted by a panel appointed by the minister's office, would complete within 90 days, and during the review period all treaty-derived inheritance claims would be considered under advisement. Under advisement meant not legally active. Under advisement meant Harry's 11 lordships existed on paper but had no legal force. Under advisement meant no Wizengamot seats. Under advisement meant that on the 28th, Harry could not take his seats because his seats were under advisement. Which meant no emergency session. Or rather, an emergency session without the person who'd called it having any legal standing to be there. Harry read the memo twice, hands flat on the table, and the kitchen was very quiet. Arthur said, carefully, I wanted you to see it before it became official. When does it become official? Harry asked. Tomorrow. Fudge is holding a press conference this afternoon to announce it. Probably timed so Skeeter doesn't have the full details before it runs. He learned from the decree, Sirius said, from the doorway. His voice was dark. He learned from the decree, Harry agreed. He was still looking at the memo. This is smarter. This isn't obviously illegal the way the decree was. It sounds procedural. It sounds like due diligence. He paused. 90 days takes us past the summer, past the beginning of term, past everything. Can he do this one? Ron asked. Maybe, Hermione said. She already had a book open, which meant she'd anticipated this might happen and had been prepared. A treaty review panel is within ministerial authority if it's framed as a domestic law compatibility study rather than a suspension of the treaty itself. The framing matters enormously. She looked up. But, Harry said. The Treaty of Ironhold has an arbitration clause. Article 23. If a signatory believes the treaty is being reviewed in bad faith, meaning for political rather than legal reasons, they can invoke binding arbitration with the ICW as mediator. The arbitration supersedes the domestic review. The ICW decides whether the review is legitimate. She looked at Harry. If Gringotts invokes Article 23, the domestic review is frozen pending ICW decision. Harry looked at her. Then he looked at Arthur. How long until the press conference? 6 hours, Arthur said. Right. Harry was already standing. 2 things need to happen in the next 3 hours. First, I need to be at Gringotts to speak with Ragnarok before any of this is public. Second, he looked at Hermione. Can you draft a formal legal challenge to the review panel's composition on the grounds that appointing the panel himself rather than through Wizengamot process creates an inherent conflict of interest? I can draft it in an hour, she said. Do it. Mr. Weasley. Harry turned to Arthur. Is there anyone in the ministry, senior, credible, who would be willing to go on record saying this review is politically motivated? Arthur looked at him steadily. There are several people who are deeply uncomfortable with the direction the minister's office has been taking for the past year. Some of them have families, careers, things to protect. He paused. Some of them don't. He looked at the memo. I'll make some calls. Harry nodded. Thank you. Harry. Arthur's voice was quiet, and Harry stopped. Arthur Weasley looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent his career in a ministry that routinely diminished and sidelined him for caring about the wrong things, and had kept showing up anyway. Be careful with how you do this. Not because you're wrong, you're not wrong, not about any of it. But there are people in that building who are good people in bad positions, and how you handle the next week will determine whether they move toward you or away. I know, Harry said. I'm not trying to burn anything down. I'm trying to fix something. He met Arthur's eyes. The difference matters to me. Arthur nodded once, and something in his expression settled. Then go. You've got 3 hours. Ragnarok received Harry in the main meeting room within 15 minutes of his arrival, which was Gringotts' way of signaling that the director had been expecting a visit and had organized his morning around it. He had 3 goblins with him that Harry hadn't met, legal specialists, Sharp Fong explained quietly, from the treaty division. Harry put the memo on the table. Ragnarok read it and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which was, Harry was learning, how Ragnarok processed information that genuinely surprised him, not with visible reaction but with total stillness. Article 23, Harry said. I know my own treaty, Ragnarok said, without sharpness. I know you do. I'm asking whether Gringotts is willing to invoke it. Ragnarok looked at him. The arbitration process takes a minimum of 30 days. During that period the domestic review is frozen, but so is the original timeline for your Wizengamot claims. You do not gain anything immediately. I gain something important immediately, Harry said. I gain a public record showing that the Minister of Magic triggered an international arbitration process by attempting to interfere with a Goblin-Wizard treaty, for the second time in 2 weeks. He sat forward. Ragnarok. The press conference is in 6 hours. If you invoke Article 23 before that press conference, the story isn't Minister announces treaty review. The story is, Minister's action triggers ICW arbitration before he even holds his press conference. It reframes the entire thing from proactive governance to desperate interference. Ragnarok looked at the memo. He looked at Harry. He said, You are asking me to use Goblin legal instruments as a political communications tool. I'm asking you to use them for the purpose they were created for, Harry said. Which is protecting the treaty from bad faith interference. The political effect is a consequence of doing the right thing, not the other way around. A pause. Something shifted in Ragnarok's face, that quality of a chess player making a move they've been considering for some time. Gringotts has had concerns about the political direction of the current ministry for considerably longer than the last 2 weeks, he said. The treaty review memo is the third action this summer that affects our operational standing. What were the first 2? Harry asked. A proposal to restrict Goblin ownership of certain categories of wizarding property. And a quiet amendment to the Magical Creatures Classification Act that would reclassify goblins under a more restrictive designation. He said it neutrally, the way you state facts that are outrageous and have been waiting for the opportunity to state them in the right context. Both proposals originated in the Undersecretary's office. Umbridge, Harry said. The proposals were unsigned, Ragnarok said. But the writing style is distinctive. Harry thought of Hermione's note about passive constructions and qualifying phrases. It is, he agreed. He looked at Ragnarok. Then we're not just fighting for my inheritance. We're fighting for something larger. We are fighting, Ragnarok said carefully, for the principle that agreements between our peoples are not subject to revision whenever a frightened politician finds them inconvenient. He paused. Article 23 will be invoked within the hour. The ICW will be notified. The press conference this afternoon will find itself addressing a situation that has already materially changed. Harry sat back. Thank you. Don't thank me, Ragnock said, in the exact cadence Amelia Bones had used, which made Harry think that competent people, regardless of species, had a similar allergy to sentiment when work remained. The arbitration process requires a representative to present the treaty holder's case to the ICW panel. Gringotts will provide its own legal team, but the case is strengthened significantly by having the heir's representative present. Who would that be? Someone with detailed knowledge of the estate, the inheritance, and the broader political context. Ragnock looked at him. We would suggest Sharpfong accompany a wizard representative. An adult wizard with legal standing. He paused. Sirius Black is now a free man with full legal standing. He is your closest adult relative. He would be appropriate. He'd be very good at it, Harry said, with a sudden mental image of Sirius Black in front of an ICW panel, free for the first time in 13 years, with a legal team and a case and nothing to lose and everything to gain, and felt something warm and fierce in his chest. I'll ask him today. Fudge held his press conference at 2 in the afternoon, in the ministry atrium, with Umbridge standing slightly behind and to his right at the specific angle that said support while avoiding the word associate. Harry watched from the Grimmauld Place sitting room via the report Hermione was getting through a ministry contact of her parents. She'd established, quietly, a network of communication points over the summer that Harry found impressive, and tracked the moment Fudge's prepared remarks shifted from confident to confused. The moment came approximately 3 minutes in, when a reporter, not Skeeter, a young witch from the Wizarding Wireless who apparently had better sources than Fudge expected, asked about the ICW arbitration notice that Gringotts had filed at 10:47 that morning. Fudge said, I'm sorry. The reporter repeated the question. She had the document number. Fudge said that he wasn't aware of any, that the ministry hadn't received any, that he would need to look into. Umbridge said something in his ear. Fudge said that this was a matter the ministry was taking very seriously and would address through appropriate channels. The reporter asked whether the minister agreed that invoking the treaty arbitration process effectively suspended his domestic review panel before it had been formally announced. Fudge said the ministry would be issuing a statement. 3 more reporters asked follow-up questions. Fudge deflected all of them with the increasingly hollow grace of a man running out of plausible surfaces to deflect toward. He ended the press conference 8 minutes early. He didn't know, Sirius said. He was watching Hermione's summary with his arms folded and the sharp, uncomfortable clarity of someone watching a thing they don't quite have words for yet. He genuinely didn't know Ragnock had already filed. He was counting on having 6 hours, Harry said. 6 hours to get ahead of it. Announce the review as responsible governance before anyone could frame it as interference. He watched Hermione's contact describe Fudge's expression as the arbitration question came in. He keeps thinking he has more time than he does. Why does he keep thinking that? Ron asked. Because until 2 weeks ago, Harry said, he did. He's been operating in a world where he had time to manage things, where there was always a window between a problem emerging and it becoming public, where the people he was managing didn't have independent legal standing or a team or a decade's worth of documentation. He paused. That world is gone. He just hasn't finished processing it. Skeeter's evening edition appeared. She'd filed for the special print run, which the Prophet only did for stories too large to hold until morning, with the heading, Fudge's treaty review collapses before it begins, ICW arbitration triggered AS minister attempts second interference in 2 weeks. Below it, in the 3rd paragraph, a detail that Harry hadn't known Skeeter had and which made him read the paragraph twice. Sources within the ministry have confirmed to this reporter that the review panel memo was drafted by the office of the undersecretary, not the minister himself, and that the minister signed it without full briefing on its treaty implications. Multiple ministry officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, have described a growing pattern of the minister's office acting on advice that prioritizes political expediency over legal soundness. Multiple ministry officials. Speaking on condition of anonymity. Harry looked at that paragraph for a long time. Then he looked up at Arthur Weasley, who was reading the same paragraph from across the table. "I made some calls," Arthur said quietly. "Thank you," Harry said. "Don't." Arthur's voice was gruff. "I should have made those calls a long time ago." The next 3 days moved quickly. The ICW formally acknowledged the arbitration filing. 3 Wizengamot members, 2 from old neutral families, 1 surprisingly from what Harry had considered the opposition bloc, sent private notes requesting preliminary meetings, which Marchbanks attended on his behalf and reported back with summaries that were more encouraging than expected. Remus threw himself into Wizengamot session prep with the quiet thoroughness of a former teacher who'd found the right topic, and produced a briefing document on the historical precedents for Harry's 11 house claims that Hermione called the most useful thing she'd ever read, which was high praise from Hermione and clearly meant a lot to Remus even though he tried not to show it. Dumbledore had not made contact since his careful letter, and Harry had not made contact with Dumbledore. He knew, from Remus, that Dumbledore was aware of the hearing, the exoneration, and the upcoming session. He knew Dumbledore had called an order meeting. He knew Dumbledore was, to use Remus's careful, measured phrasing, recalibrating. Harry didn't call the meeting Dumbledore wasn't calling. He didn't send the letter Dumbledore wasn't sending. The conversation they needed to have was specific and important, and it needed to happen on Harry's terms, which meant not before the Wizengamot session. He wrote that down, after the session. Dumbledore. Full accounting. Not a fight, a conversation. He looked at it for a moment, then underlined it. On the 4th day, Amelia Bones sent a message: 3 of Fudge's departmental heads have requested separate meetings with me this week. Not about anything specific. Just, checking in. A pause in the parchment, and then, the ship is listing. Harry wrote back, "Don't let anyone leave it early. I need them in their seats on the 28th. She replied, "Understood." On the 5th day, the thing Harry had been half expecting and half dreading arrived in the form of a letter on Hogwarts stationery, sealed with a personal mark he recognized. He opened it and read it twice. Then he went to find Sirius. Sirius was in the back garden, an actual garden. Grimmauld Place had one behind the house, small and overgrown but genuine, sitting in a chair that had been charmed into being comfortable, reading a 3-week-old copy of the Quibbler with the specific pleasure of a man who had not been able to sit in a garden and read anything for 13 years and was not taking it for granted. Harry sat on the low wall beside him and held out the letter. Sirius read it. His jaw tightened. He read it again. Then he set it down on his knee and looked at the overgrown garden. He wants to talk before the session. Yes. On neutral ground. Terms of his choosing. He said neutral ground, which suggests he knows my ground isn't his anymore. Harry looked at the same patch of overgrown hedge Sirius was looking at. He's not asking me to drop anything. He's not telling me I'm wrong. He's asking for a conversation before it all becomes public and formal. He's asking to manage it, Sirius said. There was old anger in his voice, the kind that's been living in you so long it doesn't run hot anymore. He wants to shape how you approach it before you're in front of the Wizengamot. Maybe, Harry said. Or he wants to tell me something before I find it out in public. He paused. Those aren't the same thing. Sirius was quiet. I'm not going alone, Harry said. And I'm not going before the session. I'm going after. That's my response. He might not like that. I know. Harry picked up the letter. But I'm not 15 years old sitting in his office hoping he'll tell me things. I'm 15 years old with 11 Wizengamot seats and a legal team and 3 days before an emergency session that is going to change a significant number of things. He folded the letter. He can wait 3 days. Sirius looked at him sideways. You know what Dumbledore's problem with you is? Several things, probably. He spent 14 years thinking of you as a piece on a board. And you turned out to be the person playing the board. Sirius picked up his quibbler. He's not a bad man, Harry. He's a man who got so good at seeing the large picture that he stopped seeing the people in it. That's a specific kind of damage. I know, Harry said. That's why the conversation is after, not never. He wrote back to Dumbledore, after the session. Grim old place. Bring whatever you think I need to know. He sealed it with the Potter ring. He sent it. Then he went back inside and spent the next 3 days preparing for the most important public moment of his 15-year-old life, and he did it with the specific, grounded calm of someone who has already decided what they're going to do and is simply getting ready to do it well. The night before the session he sat at his desk for a long time with his notes in front of him and the rings on his fingers and the study quiet around him. He thought about Cedric, because Cedric was always there somewhere in the back of everything, a specific absence that hadn't gotten smaller. He thought about his parents, who he'd never known but whose choices had cascaded through decades and landed here, in this room, in him. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. Then he closed his notebook, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to sleep. He slept 6 hours, clean and dreamless. In the morning, he got up, put on the best clothes he had, which, with Sirius's insistence and Hermione's organization, were now genuinely good clothes, not Dudley's cast-offs, buttoned his cuffs over the rings, had breakfast, and walked out the front door of Grimmauld Place into a bright, cold August morning with Sirius on his left and Hermione and Ron behind him and Remus at the end of the road with a small, fierce smile on his face. Harry breathed in the morning air. 28. The 28th. Today. He was ready. Chapter 5. The Wizengamot session. The Ministry of Magic at 8 in the morning had the particular energy of a building that knew something large was about to happen inside it and was conducting its ordinary business with the stiff, self-conscious quality of an audience pretending not to watch the stage being set. Harry noticed it the moment they came through the flue, the way conversations in the atrium dropped and then recovered too quickly, the way Ministry employees who were crossing the golden floor slowed down near their group and then sped up again when they realized they'd slowed down. He noticed the clustering near the lifts, the whispering, the way 3 different people pulled out copies of the Prophet with his face on it and then put them away when he looked in their direction. He kept walking. Sirius was beside him, which still had the quality of a thing that hadn't fully become real yet, Sirius Black in the Ministry of Magic, walking openly, wearing robes that fit properly because Marchbanks had quietly arranged a wardrobe budget from the wrongful imprisonment compensation account and Sirius had spent an afternoon buying clothes with the stunned pleasure of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to choose what he wore. He was drawing looks too, but different ones, recognition, uncertainty, the particular discomfort of people recalibrating a story they'd believed for 13 years. Hermione had her briefing notes. Ron had his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in the way that meant he was prepared to argue with anyone who looked at Harry sideways. Remus walked with quiet, settled purpose, and Marchbanks was already 2 steps ahead of everyone, cutting a path through the atrium with the momentum of a woman who had been waiting for this particular morning for some time. The lift took them down. Courtroom 10 was already half full when they arrived, which was early, and the half that had filled it had done so with the specific strategic intent of people who wanted seats and knew they were limited. Harry recognized Wizengamot members from the records Sharp Fong had given him, old family names, neutral families, political operators. He recognized several faces from the newspaper coverage of the Ministry over the last few weeks. He recognized Lucius Malfoy, seated in the higher tiers with 2 other men Harry identified from the records as Nott and Avery, all 3 wearing expressions of carefully maintained calm that was doing only partial duty over what was underneath. And he recognized, in the press seats to the left, Rita Skeeter with a proper quill and an expression of barely contained professional excitement. She caught his eye and gave him a small, precise nod. He gave her one back. The chamber had the dimensions of a place designed to feel significant, high ceiling, tiered seating, stone that absorbed sound and returned it slightly changed, the way stone always does. At the center, the chair. Harry had read about the chair, in the historical records Remus had compiled, but reading about it and looking at it were different things. It was old wood, high-backed, with the Wizengamot seal carved into it, and it sat in a pool of light from somewhere above that was not entirely natural. He didn't look at it too long. Amelia Bones was at the presiding bench in the front, already arranging documents, wearing formal Wizengamot robes with the DMLE insignia at the shoulder. She looked up when Harry entered and gave him nothing, no smile, no acknowledgement, the perfectly calibrated blankness of someone in an official capacity, but her eyes said, "We're ready." Harry sat in the waiting area to the right of the main floor, behind a low partition, with his team. He spread his notes on the narrow bench in front of him and went through them once more, not because he needed to but because the physical act of reading was grounding. Marchbanks leaned over and said, quietly, "The session starts at 9. Bones will open, establish procedure, introduce the formal complaint. You'll be called to the floor when she says so. Take the floor slowly. Don't rush." "I know," Harry said. "Don't let anyone interrupt your first paragraph." "I know. If Malfoy, I know." She looked at him. "You've done this before." "I've been in this room before," Harry said. "Not for this." He thought about the summer before second year, the hover charm hearing, the way the room had felt then, enormous and hostile and designed to make him feel small. It felt different now. Not smaller. He felt different. "It'll be fine." "It will be," she said, with the confidence of someone who had just filed the legal equivalent of a siege on the ministry's foundations and watched the walls start moving. The chamber filled completely by 5 to 9. Standing room appeared at the back and was filled. 3 Wizengamot members arrived at 4 minutes to the hour that Harry hadn't expected, 2 from the opposition bloc Amelia Bones had identified, 1 ancient woman in robes of deep purple who Harry didn't recognize until Remus leaned over and said, very quietly, "Griselda Marchbanks, Chief Examiner, she retired from the Wizengamot 15 years ago but her seat remained, she's never used it until today." And that told Harry something useful about the weight people were assigning to today's proceedings. At 9 o'clock exactly, Amelia Bones called the session to order. Her voice in this room had the quality that good authority always has, it didn't need to be loud. It just needed to mean something, and it did. This emergency session of the Wizengamot has been called under the Charter of 1612, Article 7, by the formal petition of Lord Harry James Potter, holder of 11 noble and ancient house seats, citing material harm to house interests through actions taken without the heir's knowledge or consent. The session has been properly filed, verified, and scheduled in accordance with all applicable procedures. She looked around the chamber. "I will note for the record that this session has been independently verified as legally compliant by the Gringotts Treaty Division and by the Office of the International Confederation of Wizards, in their capacity as Treaty of Ironhold Arbiters." A pause. "We will proceed." From somewhere in the upper tiers, a voice, clipped, nasal, umbrage before Harry even found her face, "Madam Chair, I would like to raise a procedural. The floor has not been open for procedural motions," Bones said, without looking up from her documents. "We will proceed." A ripple through the chamber. Something that wasn't quite a murmur but was the sound of people recalibrating who was running the room. "Lord Potter," Bones said. "The floor is yours." Harry stood. He walked from the waiting area to the floor, slowly. "Don't rush," Marchbanks had said, and she was right, the chamber was watching every step, and stopped at the center. Not in the chair. The chair was for accused persons, for people on trial, and he was not on trial. He stood on the open floor with the Wizengamot arranged in their tiers around him and all 11 rings on his fingers in plain sight and looked at the room. He said, "My name is Harry James Potter. I'm 15 years old. I've been at Hogwarts for 4 years. Most of you know what I've been described as in those years, the boy who lived, the chosen one, a disturbed attention seeker, depending on which edition of the prophet you read." A brief silence. "I'm here today as something more specific than any of those things. I'm here as the legal holder of 11 noble and ancient house seats that have been dormant in this chamber for between 80 and 700 years. And I'm here to talk about what happened to those seats, and what happened to me, while they were empty." He kept his voice level. Not flat, level. There was a difference. Flat was no effect. Level was complete control of effect, which meant you could place feeling exactly where you wanted it. I want to start with something concrete, he said. Not a document or a legal clause. A person. He looked around the chamber. Sirius Black. Some of you know that name. Most of you know the version of it that was in the newspapers in 1981, mass murderer, Death Eater, betrayer of my parents. 13 years in Azkaban. He was exonerated 4 days ago by the DMLE review process, chaired by Madame Bones, after it was found that he was never given a trial. A pause. Let that sit. Not a fair trial. Not a trial with insufficient evidence. No trial. He was arrested, processed, and placed in Azkaban without any formal hearing, without any representation, without any opportunity to speak. 13 years. The chamber was very quiet. In 1994, Harry said, a petition was filed to the Wizengamot for Sirius Black's posthumous pardon, filed when it was believed he was dead, which he wasn't, but the principle held. That petition went to a vote. It failed by 1 vote. He looked up at the tiers. The vote against was cast in the name of House Peverell. By Albus Dumbledore, acting as magical guardian of the House Peverell heir, casting a proxy vote without the heir's knowledge or consent. He kept his voice entirely even. I am the House Peverell heir. I did not know the house existed, I did not know the petition existed, and I was not asked. He let that land. I want to be clear, he said, because this was the moment where clarity mattered more than anything, about what I am and am not claiming today. I am not claiming that Albus Dumbledore is a malicious person. I am not here to prosecute him or ask this chamber to censure him. He could feel the surprise in the room, a slight shift, a recalibration, people who had expected attack and were getting something more precise. What I am claiming is that the system that allowed it, the magical guardianship structure, the proxy voting provisions, the absence of any notification requirement to heirs whose votes are being cast, is broken. It produced a specific injustice in Sirius Black's case. It produced dozens of lesser injustices in 47 pieces of legislation over 14 years. And it did all of that without anyone in this room knowing it was happening, because the system was designed without sufficient transparency. He reached into his jacket and produced the first document, the legislative summary Sharp Fong had compiled. He held it up. 47 pieces of legislation, he said. Between 1981 and 2 weeks ago. 29 blocked by proxy vote, several of them using votes from my houses. 18 passed with proxy support from my houses. None of it with my knowledge. None of it with any documentation that was accessible to me. He set the document on the clerk's table at the edge of the floor. I'm tabling the full list for the record. I'd ask this chamber to consider, in particular, items 3, 7, 14, and 22. Item 3 is the first reading of the Creature Rights Reform Act in 1988, blocked 3 times over 8 years. Item 7 is the Azkaban Oversight Proposal of 1990, which would have required independent review of prisoner conditions. Item 14 is a proposed amendment to the Magical Guardianship Act that would have required guardians to document proxy votes and notify heirs upon reaching majority. That amendment was blocked in 1992. Item 22, he said, and his voice changed here, not much, but enough that people who were paying attention felt it, is the Muggleborn Registry repeal, which has been proposed and blocked 4 times since 1985. The chamber was completely still. I want to address the Muggleborn Registry specifically, Harry said, because it connects to something in the audit findings that I think this chamber needs to understand. He looked around the room, taking in faces, some carefully neutral, some visibly uncomfortable, 2 in the upper tier that he'd identified as likely allies who were leaning forward, and Lucius Malfoy, who was watching him with eyes that gave nothing away and a jaw that was very slightly set. My mother, Lily Potter née Evans, was described for her entire adult life as a Muggleborn witch. She is listed in the registry as Muggleborn. Every political argument about blood status that used my mother as an example, of Muggleborns being worthy of inclusion, or unworthy, depending on the speaker, used false information. He said it plainly, without drama. My mother's maternal grandmother was a squib from House Dagworth Granger, a wizarding family. My mother was a half-blood. The registry was wrong. Which means the registry's data is not reliable. Which means every policy, every argument, every piece of legislation that has ever used registry data as its foundation has been built on a compromised source. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a voice, not Umbridge this time, an older man, deep voice, controlled, "This is highly irregular." Which part? Harry asked, and looked directly at the speaker, who he identified from his briefing notes as Amos Diggory, not Amos, a different Amos, Coventwood, one of the old family block. He said it without heat, a genuine question, keeping his voice conversational. The part where the registry is wrong, or the part where we're talking about it? Coventwood sat back. Continue, Lord Potter, Amelia Bones said, and there was something very faint in her voice that might have been satisfaction. He spoke for 40 minutes. He covered the legislative history. He covered the guardianship structure and its absence of oversight. He covered the Muggleborn Registry's data reliability. He covered the Azkaban oversight proposal with specific reference to conditions documented by the International Wizarding Rights Body in 1991 that had gone unaddressed. He covered the blocked creature rights legislation, citing 3 specific cases of creatures who had been denied legal recourse that the legislation would have provided. He did not shout. He did not perform. He spoke like someone who knew what they were talking about and had done the work to know it, and the chamber listened with the specific quality of attention that happens when people are being given information they can't dispute and some of them are realizing they'd prefer to be able to. When he finished the main body, he said, "I want to be clear about what I'm asking this chamber to do today. I'm not asking you to condemn anyone. I'm asking you to fix the system." He looked around the room one final time. "I'm proposing 3 pieces of legislation for first reading at this session. First, a magical guardianship transparency amendment, requiring all proxy votes cast under guardianship to be documented, notified to heirs upon majority, and subject to independent review upon petition." He produced the first document. Second, an Azkaban Independent Oversight Commission, establishing a standing body with authority to review prisoner conditions and detention legality, with mandatory minimum review cycles. Second document. Third, a Registry Accuracy Act, requiring an independent audit of the Muggleborn Registry's data against all available wizarding genealogical records, with a 1-year moratorium on all policy decisions that rely on registry data pending the audit's completion. Third document. He set all 3 on the clerk's table. "These are specific, limited, achievable proposals," he said. "They address documented problems with documented solutions. I'm happy to answer questions about any of them." He paused. "I'm also happy to answer questions about the inheritance findings, the guardianship history, or anything else in the documentation I've tabled, which runs to approximately 400 pages and is available at the clerk's table." He looked at the room. "That's all I have," he said. He walked back to his seat. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then 3 things happened at once. Amelia Bones opened the floor for response, Lucius Malfoy rose from his seat, and Rita Skeeter began writing with the focused velocity of someone whose headline was already fully formed. Malfoy was good. Harry had expected him to be good and had still slightly underestimated the specific quality of it, the way he stood, the measured authority in his voice, the way he managed to sound reasonable while constructing an argument whose entire purpose was to make the chamber doubt what they'd just heard. The Wizengamot must of course take seriously any documented concerns about procedural irregularities, Malfoy said, with a careful reasonableness that was itself a performance. However, I would caution this chamber against treating the testimony of a 15-year-old, however well prepared, as the sole basis for what amounts to a sweeping indictment of our entire governance structure. Lord Potter's sincerity is not in question. His experience, however, is limited, and the complexity of the matters he raises, my experience of the matters I've raised, Harry said, from his seat, with complete calm, is primary. I was the person it happened to. A slight ripple. Bones said, Lord Potter, you'll have response time. Apologies, Madam Chair. Harry settled back. Malfoy continued, seamlessly, as if the interruption hadn't happened, but something had shifted. He'd lost a beat and recovered it, which meant he'd needed to recover it, which meant the interruption had landed. The proposals before us today, if rushed to vote without proper committee examination, first reading doesn't require committee, a voice said from the upper tiers. Harry looked. The ancient woman in purple, Griselda Marchbanks. She said it as simple fact, without heat. First reading establishes the text, Malfoy said. It doesn't, it establishes the text and triggers a mandatory second reading within 30 days, Marchbanks said. I know the procedure, Lord Malfoy. I was on the committee that wrote it. She looked down at the floor with clear, sharp eyes. The proposals are specific and well drafted. I've read them. They address documented problems. I see no reason to obstruct first reading. A murmur. Real, this time, not the performed kind. Malfoy sat down. He did it smoothly, without apparent frustration, but Harry was watching him and caught the fractional pause before he sat, the fractional recalibration, and filed it away. Umbridge rose next. Harry had been prepared for Umbridge. He'd been prepared for the voice, that specific sweet poison tone that managed to be condescending and threatening simultaneously, and he'd been prepared for the content. What he hadn't been fully prepared for was how much he didn't like her. Not in the abstract political opponent way. Specifically, viscerally, on a level that was probably useful information about her. Some people communicated threat through presence. Umbridge communicated control. The difference mattered. The chair recognizes Madam Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge, Bones said, with a perfect flatness that communicated nothing and somehow said everything. Umbridge smiled. Thank you, Madam Chair. She looked at Harry. Lord Potter, and I use the title pending the resolution of the ICW arbitration. Of course, the title is not pending, Marchbanks said, from the upper tier, without looking up from the document she was reading. The ICW arbitration concerns the Ministry's review proposal, not the inheritance claim itself. The inheritance has been verified by Gringotts and is legally established independent of any Ministry action. Umbridge's smile didn't change. Of course. I simply note it for completeness. She pivoted. I want to address the claim regarding the Muggleborn registry, because I think it's important that this chamber understands the weight of what's being proposed. Lord Potter is suggesting, on the basis of a single case, his own family's genealogy, that we call into question an entire data system that has been the foundation of. It's not a single case, Hermione said. The room turned. Hermione was in the observer section, not the floor. She had no floor standing, but the observer section had limited speaking rights in emergency sessions under the charter, which Harry had looked up specifically and which Marchbanks had confirmed. She stood with the specific posture of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. I apologize for interrupting. But the Gringotts audit found 3 other cases in Harry's direct ancestry alone where registry data contradicts the blood magic genealogical record. Gringotts has indicated, in their preliminary findings, that a broader audit would likely find a significant number of additional discrepancies. One case might be an anomaly. For cases in a single family's line is a systemic data quality problem. Umbridge looked at her with an expression that was trying to be dismissive and was finding the job difficult. And you are? Hermione Granger, Hermione said. I've reviewed the documentation. This chamber doesn't typically hear from. Observer rights under Article 14 of the 1612 Charter apply in emergency sessions when the observer has direct documentary evidence relevant to the proceedings, Bones said, still with that perfect flatness. Miss Granger may speak. Umbridge sat down. Harry, from his seat, looked at Hermione, who looked back at him, and he gave her the smallest possible nod that said, good. She sat down with the expression of someone who had been furious for several weeks and had just found a useful place to put some of it. The session ran for 3 hours. There were speeches, some supportive, some cautiously non-committal, 3 aggressively opposed. There were procedural objections that Bones handled with an authority that made it clear she had anticipated every single one. There were questions for Harry, which he answered directly, citing specific documents when applicable, refusing to speculate when he didn't have documentation, and declining twice to be drawn into personal attacks, once when a Wizengamot member attempted to bring up the Triwizard Tournament and Voldemort, and once when an attempt was made to reintroduce the Prophet's earlier coverage of him as unstable. On the second attempt, Harry said, simply, the Prophet's characterization of me was written during a period when the minister's office had a close relationship with the paper's editor. I'd suggest that's a question about journalistic independence rather than about me, and I'd refer you to Skeeter's reporting from the last 3 weeks for the relevant context. Skeeter, from the press gallery, was writing with the fervor of someone having the professional moment of their life. Fudge himself spoke once, mid-session, rising from his seat in the minister's gallery above the main chamber, a box to the side, slightly elevated, from which ministers traditionally observed Wizengamot proceedings without participating. He was allowed floor access during sessions, and when he came down the chamber felt it, a shift in the air, the weight of his office, the fact that he was still the minister. He stood in the center of the floor and looked at Harry, and Harry looked back at him, and Harry thought, this is a man who has been frightened for 2 weeks and it shows. Fudge was not an unintelligent man. Harry had never thought he was. He was a man who had built his entire career on the management of consensus, on reading which way sentiment was moving and positioning himself ahead of it, and who had encountered a situation that moved faster than he could manage and in too many directions simultaneously. He looked tired. He looked, underneath the official robes and the careful posture, like someone who had not been sleeping well. Harry felt something that was not quite sympathy but was adjacent to understanding. I want to address this chamber, Fudge said, regarding some of the characterizations, Lord Fudge. The voice came from the upper tier, and Harry tracked it to one of the neutral old family Wizengamot members, Lord Greengrass, whom Amelia Bones had described in her intelligence briefing as someone who made decisions based on institutional integrity rather than political alignment, which was itself a kind of politics but a more principled kind. I'd ask you to specifically address the absence of trial in the Black case. That's the matter I find most pressing. A pause. The chamber was very still. Fudge said, the circumstances of 1981 were exceptional. The ministry was in crisis. Decisions were made that, was it your decision? Greengrass asked. Fudge was quiet for a moment. It preceded my time as minister. Who ordered the imprisonment without trial? That would be a matter for the historical record, Marchbank said, from the upper tier, not loudly, just precisely, indicates that Bartemius Crouch Sr., as head of the DMLE at the time, had the authority and made that decision. Bartemius Crouch is dead. The ministry's current leadership is therefore responsible for the correction of that error rather than its commission. She paused. The correction has been made by Madam Bones, which I think we all agree is appropriate. The question before this chamber is what structural changes prevent it happening again. Fudge looked at Marchbanks for a moment. Something crossed his face that Harry couldn't fully read. Then he said, I support the principle of structural review. He went back to his box. Harry watched him go. He watched the set of Fudge's shoulders, the slightly deliberate quality of his walk, the way he sat down and arranged his robes and fixed his expression to neutral, and he thought, he knows. He knows this is the end of something. He just hasn't decided what to do with that yet. The votes on first reading came at 11:30. Bones called them one by one, and the Wizengamot voted by standing. Harry had estimated, from Amelia Bones's intelligence and his own analysis of the briefings, that he needed 140 votes for a working majority. He'd targeted 160 as a comfortable outcome. Guardianship Transparency Amendment, 183 for, 41 against, 12 abstaining. Azkaban Oversight Commission, 177 for, 49 against, 10 abstaining. Registry Accuracy Act, 164 for, 61 against, 11 abstaining. The Registry Act was the narrowest, which Harry had expected, it was the most politically sensitive, the one that touched the most established interests. But 164 was a substantial working majority, and first readings with that kind of support almost never failed at second reading, which was the binding vote. Harry stood with the chamber during the count and kept his face calm, and noted every person who stood for and every person who remained seated, and filed that information away. He'd need it later. The people who'd stood for all three, the ones who'd given him their support publicly, on record, those were people who'd made a choice with consequences, and they deserved to know he'd noticed. After the session was called closed by Bones, after the chamber began to empty in the particular layered way of a large official space where different people needed to be seen leaving in the right order, after Marchbanks had clasped Harry's hand and said, very well done indeed, with genuine feeling, after all of that, Harry stood in the center of the emptying floor and waited. He waited because Fudge was still in his box. Sirius was beside him, the others slightly behind, and the room was mostly empty now, and the light from the high unnatural source was the same steady gold, and Fudge finally came down from the minister's gallery and walked across the floor toward Harry and stopped about 8 feet away. They looked at each other. You know what comes next, Fudge said quietly. Not accusatory, almost resigned. Like someone naming a fact they'd been aware of for some time. I don't want to be minister, Harry said, because that was the first thing, always. I'm 15. I don't want political power. I want the system to work properly. That's what everyone says. I mean it. Harry looked at him evenly. You've been in office for 7 years, Minister. You've done things that were wrong and things that were right, and most of the things that were wrong were done because you were frightened of the wrong things. That's not unique. That's human. He paused. But Voldemort is back, and the ministry needs to be able to respond to that, and the ministry cannot respond to that while it's spending its energy on midnight decrees about my inheritance. The country needs a minister who can face that reality. Fudge looked at him. You're telling me to resign. I'm telling you what I think, Harry said. What you do with it is yours. A long pause. The chamber was nearly empty now. The stone walls absorbed the quiet and gave nothing back. Fudge said, How old did you say you were? 15. Right. He looked at Harry for another moment, and something in his face was old and tired and not entirely unsympathetic. Then he turned and walked toward the chamber door, and his footsteps echoed in the emptying room, and he didn't look back. The session was over. In the corridor outside, Harry found himself surrounded by people, Wizengamot members wanting to speak, reporters with questions, a very intense woman from the ICW liaison office, and navigated it with Marchbanks's assistance and Hermione's terrifyingly efficient crowd management until they'd extracted themselves into a quieter side corridor where Sirius caught Harry by the shoulder and said, simply, You did it. We did it, Harry said. Don't be humble, it's not your best quality. It worked because Bones was brilliant and Marchbanks was prepared and Hermione knew the charter provisions and Ragnarok moved fast and Remus wrote that briefing and you, Harry stopped. You were there. You were in the room. 12 years ago they put you in Azkaban and today you walked into the ministry and sat in the observer seats while I took Wizengamot seats that were blocked the year they tried to pardon you. He looked at Sirius. That meant something. Sirius's expression did the thing it did when something had gotten past his defenses. He put his hand on the back of Harry's neck briefly, the specific gesture that was shorthand for I don't have words for this in the language they'd been developing over the last few weeks, and then let go. Right, he said. What's next? Lunch, Harry said. And then Dumbledore. Today. He's been waiting 3 days. That's long enough. Harry looked down the corridor toward the lift. I want it done before anything from today becomes a narrative that gets fixed. He paused. I want him to hear from me, not from the morning paper. Sirius nodded. He understood. Ron appeared around the corner with Hermione and said, The prophet is trying to get a statement. Skeeter is blocking them, which is, honestly a really strange thing to watch. She has an exclusive, Harry said. Tell them we'll issue a written statement tomorrow. Through who? Through me, Harry said. Directly. No intermediary. Ron blinked. You're just going to write to the prophet yourself? It's my statement, Harry said. Why would someone else write it? Ron opened his mouth and closed it and looked at Hermione, who said, He's right, you know. I know he's right, Ron said. It's just, when did this happen? The 14th of August, Harry said. Outside a flower bed. He moved toward the lift. Come on. I'm starving and I have a conversation I've been planning for 2 weeks. He walked, and they followed, and behind them the Wizengamot chamber stood empty and reordered, and somewhere above them the ministry was doing what institutions do in the aftermath of seismic events, scrambling to appear as if it had been prepared for this all along. 3 hours later, at 2:30, a message went out through the ministry internal owl system from the minister's personal office. It was brief, 4 sentences, and addressed to Amelia Bones, the Wizengamot administrator, the chief warlock, and the office of the Daily Prophet simultaneously. Harry read it that evening, when Skeeter sent a copy to Grimmauld Place ahead of the morning run. It said, effective immediately, I am resigning from the position of Minister for Magic. I have served this country to the best of my ability for 7 years and I am grateful for the opportunity to do so. I commend the Wizengamot for its important work today and wish my successor well in the challenges ahead. This decision is my own, made freely and in the best interests of Wizarding Britain. It was signed, Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Minister for Magic, resigned. Harry read it once. Hermione read it over his shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then, he did it himself. Yes, Harry said. You didn't force him. No. You just told him what you thought. That's all I did, Harry said. Sometimes that's enough. He folded the paper. He thought about Fudge's face in the empty chamber, the tiredness, the resignation that had been there before the resignation. He thought about how long Fudge had probably known, somewhere, that it was coming, and had spent weeks running from it with decrees and review panels and press conferences, and had finally gotten to a place where the running cost more than the stopping. He wasn't triumphant about it. He'd been aiming at this outcome, yes, but the outcome was a man's career ending and a government scrambling, and those were serious things. He respected their weight. Right, said Sirius, from the doorway, with a bottle of butterbeer in each hand. Are we celebrating or are we being solemn? Harry thought about it. Both, he said. In that order. Solemn first or, celebrate first, Ron said firmly, from the kitchen. We've had enough solemn. It'll keep. Harry laughed. He took the butterbeer from Sirius and looked at the letter one more time and then set it face down on the table, which was enough ceremony for now, and went to find his friends. Chapter 6, What Comes After Dumbledore arrived at Grimmauld Place at 10 in the morning, alone, on foot, without announcement beyond a brief knock that had the specific quality of someone who was choosing not to use magic on a door they could have opened 15 other ways. Harry opened it himself. They looked at each other in the doorway. Dumbledore looked older than Harry had expected, which was not a thing Harry had anticipated thinking. Dumbledore had always seemed ageless in the particular way of very powerful wizards, too large for time to mark in the ordinary fashion. But standing on the front step of Grimmauld Place in the grey morning light, without the Hogwarts backdrop that gave him so much of his authority, he looked like a tall old man with too many responsibilities and the beginning of something like regret working in the lines around his eyes. Harry, he said. Come in, Harry said. He stepped back. Dumbledore entered. The house was quiet. Sirius had taken Ron and Hermione out at Harry's request, not because he was worried about what they might say but because this conversation was specific, and specificity needed space. Remus was upstairs reading with the studied neutrality of someone who had strong feelings about this meeting and had been asked to hold them in reserve, which he was doing with visible effort. Harry led Dumbledore to the sitting room, which was the most neutral room in the house. They'd cleared most of the Black family artifacts from it and it was now simply a room with chairs and books and morning light coming through the cleaned window, and Harry sat in one chair and Dumbledore sat in the other, and for a moment they were just two people in a room, which felt like a significant reconfiguration of something that had always been unbalanced. Dumbledore looked at the rings on Harry's fingers. All 11, warm and settled, as if they'd always been there. "They suit you," he said. "Don't," Harry said. "Not unkindly. Just precisely." Dumbledore looked at him. "Don't start with something that sounds like the beginning of a Dumbledore conversation," Harry said. "I don't want a Dumbledore conversation. I want an honest one, and those aren't always the same thing, and I think you know that." He kept his voice even. "I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that before we start, because I think you're expecting anger, and I think if you expect it you'll spend the whole conversation managing it instead of talking to me. I'm not angry. I've moved past it. But I have specific things I need to understand, and I need you to answer them without framing them." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Without framing them," he repeated. "Without explaining why you did them in a way that makes the explanation the point," Harry said. "Just the what and the when. I'll do my own thinking about the why." A long pause. The house settled. Somewhere above them, the floorboard that always creaked. "That's fair," Dumbledore said. And something shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Harry was watching carefully. The particular posture Dumbledore used for official conversations, the slight elevation of bearing, the careful assemblage of gravitas, it relaxed, fractionally. He looked, again, like an old man. "The magical guardianship," Harry said. "When you took it, did you know about the Wizengamot seats?" "Yes." "Did you know about all 11 houses?" "I knew about some of them at the time. I learned the full extent over the years as the Gringotts records were periodically summarized to me as guardian." "Did you know you were supposed to notify me upon reaching majority?" "There is no requirement to notify under the 1836 Act," Dumbledore said. "There is an expectation. I intended to tell you, had planned to do so this summer, in fact, as you approached an age where I felt the information was appropriate." Harry sat with that. "You were going to tell me this summer?" "Yes. After I'd spent the summer at the Dursleys, receiving no information about anything, being told to stay put and not do anything, receiving a letter asking me to keep you informed of significant developments, as if," he stopped. Breathed. "As if the situation were one where you were managing me rather than one where I had rights." Dumbledore said nothing. Which was itself a kind of answer. "The serious pardon petition," Harry said. "In 1994. You voted against it." "Yes." "Why?" "Because," Dumbledore said, and his voice was steady but careful in a way that was honest rather than managed, "Sirius, if cleared, would have immediately become your legal guardian. He would have removed you from Privet Drive. The blood wards that protect you there are tied to your mother's sacrifice and your Aunt Petunia's blood. They are among the most powerful protective enchantments I know of, and they exist nowhere else. If you left Privet Drive for good, before Voldemort's return was confirmed and countered, you were exposed." He paused. "I made a calculation." "With a vote that wasn't yours," Harry said. "Yes." "Without telling me." "You were 13. That," Harry said, "is the part one most need you to understand isn't a sufficient answer." He leaned forward slightly. "You could have told Sirius. You could have told Sirius, here is the situation, here is why I need Harry to stay at Privet Drive, here is what I'm asking you to accept and why." Sirius might have argued, might have been furious, might have disagreed entirely, but you could have told him. Instead you made the decision for both of us without telling either of us. He looked at Dumbledore directly. "That's not protection. That's management." Dumbledore was very still. "I know," he said. Harry had been prepared for defense. He'd been prepared for careful explanation, for the elaborate architecture of justification that Dumbledore was capable of building around almost anything. He had not been entirely prepared for those two words, said plainly, without qualification. "I know," Dumbledore said again, and this time it was quieter. I have spent, rather a lot of time, in the last 2 weeks, sitting with the fact that I was wrong about this in specific and important ways. Not about the goal. The goal was always your protection, and Sirius's, and the broader protection of everyone who stands to suffer if Voldemort is not defeated. He looked at Harry. But I treated you as a piece in a game I was playing, and I treated the people who loved you as pieces, and I did it with such long practice that I stopped noticing it was what I was doing. Something passed across his face that was too genuine to be performance. I am sorry, Harry. Not for trying to protect you. For the way I did it. The room was very quiet. Harry sat with the apology. He turned it over the way you turn over something you've been handed and are checking the weight of. It was genuine, he could feel that, and he'd learned, over 4 years, to trust his instincts about when Dumbledore was performing and when he wasn't. This was the real thing. The specific, considered, clearly expensive apology of someone who had thought very hard about exactly what they were apologizing for. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Okay, Harry said again. I hear you. I believe you. He sat back. That doesn't undo any of it. The years of restricted mail, the blocked votes, the guardianship. Those things happened and their consequences happened, and some of those consequences, Sirius's 13 years, can't be undone. He paused. But I'm not interested in punishment. I never was. I said that in the session and I meant it. What are you interested in? Dumbledore asked. Understanding what comes next, Harry said. Voldemort is back. Whatever you've been building with the Order of the Phoenix, I need to know about it. Not the version that's appropriate for a 15-year-old. The real version. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm Lord of 11 houses with Wizengamot seats and a legal team and a direct line to Gringotts and the ICW. I'm not a child to be protected from the situation. I'm a resource, if you'll use me as one, and I'm going to be acting anyway if you won't, so the question is whether we're working together or in parallel. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You've changed. I've been here the whole time, Harry said. You were just making decisions about the version of me you thought I was. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, moved, and he said, very quietly, yes. I think that's exactly right. He looked down at his hands, folded in his lap, and then back up. There's something I need to tell you. About why Voldemort came after your family in the first place. About a prophecy. He paused. I have been keeping this from you because I was afraid of how the knowledge would affect you. I have been, as you said, making decisions about a version of you that was younger and more fragile than the person sitting in front of me. Another pause. Would you like to hear it now? Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore told him. Harry sat with the prophecy for a long time after Dumbledore finished speaking. The sitting room was still. The morning had moved forward, it was past 11 now, the light different, the city outside going about itself without any awareness of what had just been said in this room. Neither can live while the other survives. He sat with it. He turned it over. He looked at it from different angles, the way you look at a thing that is large and heavy and you're trying to understand if it's load-bearing or if you can set it down somewhere and come back to it. Then he said, does Voldemort know about this? He knows part of it, Dumbledore said. He heard the first portion only, through imperfect means. He doesn't know the full text. Does anyone else know? You and I, Sirius knows of its existence, not its content. Sirius needs to know, Harry said immediately. Harry, he's my guardian. He has legal standing now. He's been kept out of information that concerns me for 13 years, and I am not doing that to him for another day. He looked at Dumbledore. Tell me you understand why. A pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. I understand why. I'll tell him myself. Today. Harry was quiet for a moment. The prophecy doesn't change what I'm doing. The Wizengamot work, the legislation, all of that still happens, all of that still matters, because the world after Voldemort is defeated is going to be the world the people in it built before he was, and I want it to be better than the one it's replacing. He looked at his hands, the rings. But you need to tell me what you know. About Voldemort's methods, his weaknesses, what you've been researching. All of it. I will, Dumbledore said. I'd like to begin, if you're willing, with regular meetings. No more managed information. No more decisions made on your behalf. You'll have everything I have. And in exchange. Dumbledore looked at him. I'm not asking for exchange, Harry said. I'm asking if you have conditions. Because I'd rather know them than discover them later. No conditions, Dumbledore said. I think, he stopped. When he spoke again there was something different in his voice, older, less careful, the voice of someone setting down an armor they'd been wearing so long they'd stopped feeling its weight. I think I have been so focused on the defeat of Voldemort as a destination that I have not always been careful about the road there. You are making me, and I mean this without any qualification, you are making me reconsider some very fundamental things about how I've been doing this. Good, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. I mean that, Harry said. I genuinely want you reconsidering. Because you're brilliant and you care and you know things I don't know, and all of that is more useful when it's not being applied to managing people without their knowledge. He stood. We should tell Sirius you're here. He's going to know anyway, and it's better if you're in the room. Dumbledore rose from his chair. Harry. Harry stopped. I am glad, Dumbledore said carefully, that you are who you are. I was very afraid, at certain points, that the way I'd structured your life might have diminished something essential in you. He paused. It didn't. Harry thought about a cupboard under stairs. He thought about 43 days of grief and garden work and going in circles. He thought about sitting in a Gringotts stone room and pressing his thumb to an ancient lock and feeling everything change. No, he said. It didn't. He moved toward the door. Come on. Sirius is going to be furious and then relieved, and then he'll probably try to make tea, and it's a whole thing. Dumbledore followed him, and the sitting room behind them was quiet and ordinary, holding everything that had been said in it the way rooms hold things when no one is watching. Sirius was, in order, furious, relieved, and then tried to make tea, which was exactly what Harry had predicted and which made Hermione, watching from the doorway, press her lips together in the way that meant she was trying not to smile. The fury was brief and focused. Sirius said 3 sentences to Dumbledore in the kitchen that were very specific and not particularly kind, all of which were justified and none of which Dumbledore deflected, and then Sirius filled the kettle, and that was the end of the fury portion. The relief was quieter and more complicated and involved Sirius standing at the kitchen window for a moment with his back to the room, and then turning around and sitting down and saying, to Harry, you told him about conditions. I did. You checked for conditions. It seemed important. Sirius looked at Dumbledore. He checked for conditions. He did, Dumbledore said. He's 15, Sirius said, to nobody in particular. I keep being reminded of that, Dumbledore said, mildly. Right. Sirius pushed a mug toward Dumbledore. The prophecy. Harry told him. He told it clearly and completely, with Dumbledore present to confirm or clarify, and Sirius listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Harry registered it. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment and then said, How long have you known this? Since the night of the 3rd task, Dumbledore said. I received confirmation of its relevance when Voldemort used Harry's blood in the resurrection ritual. Sirius's hands tightened around the mug. 1 breath. 2. Then, and you told him this morning. Yes. You've had him at that house, with those people, all summer, knowing, Sirius, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. I know, Harry said. But we're here now. And I know now. And what I need from you right now is not more of the past. We've been in the past for 2 weeks and we need to start looking forward. You, me, Dumbledore, the Order. Properly this time. He held Sirius's gaze. Can we do that? A long moment. Something worked in Sirius's face. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate, and said, yeah. We can do that. He looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was not forgiveness but was the beginning of the functional working arrangement that comes before forgiveness, which is sometimes the more important thing. What's the plan? They talked for 4 hours. The Order of the Phoenix had been reforming since Voldemort's return, quietly, carefully, with the same wartime caution it had operated under in the First War. Dumbledore laid out what they knew. Voldemort was reconstituting his Death Eater network, prioritizing followers who had evaded prosecution, rebuilding slowly and deliberately. He was not making the same mistakes as the First War. He was not visible. He was not declaring himself. He was building towards something and taking his time. Harry listened and asked questions, and the questions were different from the questions he would have asked before, not what should I do but what do we know and what are the gaps and who's monitoring that and how reliable is the monitoring. Hermione had materialized at the kitchen table by the second hour, drawn irresistibly by the conversation's density, and had started taking notes without being asked. Ron was beside her, less interested in the strategic architecture than in the specific operational details, and asking questions about the Death Eater network with the tactical mind of a Quidditch player who thought in terms of positions and movements. Remus, when he came down, settled into the conversation with the ease of someone returning to a room they'd been absent from for too long, contributing information on Fenrir Greyback's movements that he clearly had from personal sources, adding historical context about the First War that was more specific than anything in any document. Dumbledore listened to him with genuine attention, which Harry noted. By the third hour something had shifted in the room. It was difficult to name precisely, but Harry felt it. The texture of the conversation had changed from careful exchange to actual collaboration, with people building on each other's points, interrupting productively, thinking out loud in ways that you only do when you trust the room. When he looked at Dumbledore across the table, the old wizard was leaning forward with his elbows on the wood, silver blue eyes tracking the conversation with genuine engagement, and Harry thought, this is what he should have been doing all along. This is what the Order should always have been. Not a controlled operation with one person holding all the information, this. He said so, near the end of hour 4. He said it directly, this is better. The information sharing, the actual room, this is better than whatever the Order was before. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. I know. We need this to be the model going forward. I agree. Sirius said, he agrees about as easily as he does anything that wasn't his idea. Sirius, Dumbledore said mildly. I'm allowed, Sirius said. I'm a free man with legal standing and a letter from Marchbanks saying so. You are, Dumbledore conceded, and there was something in his voice that was, Harry realized, the specific warmth of someone looking at a person they'd thought they'd lost. 3 days after the Wizengamot session, Amelia Bones was appointed interim minister for magic. Harry found out from the Morning Prophet, which he read at the kitchen table with tea, and he read the article twice and then sat with it for a moment. Amelia Bones, who had come to Grimmauld Place with her briefcase and her monocle and her flat, honest eyes and had said I'll initiate the review quietly and had then done exactly what she'd said. Who had chaired the Wizengamot session with an authority that had nothing to do with display. He wrote her a short note, congratulations, Minister. What do you need? She replied within the hour, about 15 things. I'll send a list. Also, thank you. He wrote back, don't. Just do the job. She replied, that is, in fact, exactly what I intended. He smiled at that and pinned it to the cork board. The ministry in the days following Fudge's resignation was doing what large institutions do when they lose their center of gravity unexpectedly, scrambling to redistribute weight, figuring out who was on which side of the new landscape, reassessing old alliances and establishing new ones. Several people who had been firmly in the Fudge camp sent quiet messages to Marchbanks. Umbridge, stripped of her undersecretary role when Bones took office, had gone silent in a way that Harry trusted approximately as much as he trusted Loud. He sent Sharpfong a note, "Keep an eye on the property registration records. Specifically any transfers involving ministry-adjacent names in the next 6 months." Sharpfong replied, "Already watching." Also, the 3 domestic restriction proposals from the Undersecretary's office have been formally withdrawn by the new minister. I thought you should know. Harry filed that under things that cost someone something to do and sent Bones a brief note saying simply, "Noted. Thank you." She would know what it was for. The legislation moved through its second readings with the methodical certainty of things that had been properly prepared. Harry attended both mandatory sessions, which fell within the same fortnight, and spoke once at each, briefly, because the first reading had laid the groundwork and what second readings needed was not more argument but the simple signal that the person who'd initiated the legislation was still standing behind it. The Guardianship Transparency Amendment passed its second reading by an even wider margin than the first, 191 votes. Harry thought about the extra 8 people who'd moved since the first reading and filed them as people worth knowing. The Azkaban Oversight Commission passed at 183. Amelia Bones, in her capacity as both interim minister and newly designated Commission Oversight Authority, formally appointed its first 5 members within 24 hours of passage, which was deliberately fast and deliberately public and exactly right. The Registry Accuracy Act passed at 171, 7 more than first reading. Hermione cried, briefly, in the corridor outside the chamber, and then straightened up and said, "I'm fine," in the tone of someone who was clearly fine and had simply been moved by something that mattered to them, and Ron put his arm around her and she let him, which Harry noted with the small warm satisfaction of someone watching something that has been building for 3 years finally arrive at the obvious conclusion. After the third passage, in the corridor outside, Griselda Marchbanks, who had attended all 3 readings, which Harry had learned was unprecedented for a retired member, found Harry and said, "There are 43 other pieces of dormant legislation worth your attention. Not all of them as urgent as these. Several of them quite technical. But worth reviewing. Send them to Sharpfong," Harry said. "I'll work through them." "You're going back to school in 2 weeks," she said. "Hogwarts has a library," Harry said. She looked at him with those clear, sharp eyes. "Dumbledore said something similar to me once, about 40 years ago, when I told him he was too young to be doing what he was doing." She paused. "He was right, and so are you." She patted his arm once, with the brisk affection of someone who expressed warmth efficiently, and walked away. 2 weeks before the return to Hogwarts, Harry called a meeting. Not an order meeting, not a strategic session, just the people who'd been in this house for the summer, all of them, in the kitchen, which was the room that had accumulated the most history over the last 5 weeks. Sirius. Remus. Hermione. Ron. Arthur Weasley, who'd been a regular presence and whose contribution Harry had never formally acknowledged. Marchbanks, because she'd become part of the furniture and had never once complained about it. And Dumbledore, who arrived on time for the first time since they'd started meeting, which Sirius noted out loud and which Dumbledore accepted with the grace of someone practicing it. Harry stood at the end of the table with his notes and said, "I want to say some things, and then I want to hear from everyone, and then I want to eat because it's 6:30 and nobody has made dinner." A small sound of agreement. He said, "We've done a lot in 5 weeks. Sirius is free. 3 pieces of legislation have passed. The ministry has a new interim leadership that I trust at least provisionally. The ICW arbitration is proceeding and the treaty is intact. The Gringotts audit is complete and the full estate is accessible." He paused. None of that was simple and none of it was one person. "I need everyone in this room to know I understand that." He looked at Arthur. "You made calls when it cost you something professionally. Thank you." Arthur nodded once, his ears going slightly red. "Remus, the briefing document you wrote changed how several Wizengamot members understood the inheritance question. I've heard that from 3 different people." Remus looked down at the table with the expression of someone receiving something they weren't sure they deserved, which was incorrect but entirely characteristic. And the letters, Harry added, more quietly. I want you to know that finding out you wrote, that it mattered to me. The writing and the finding out. Remus looked up. He didn't say anything, but what he did with his face said enough. Hermione, Harry said, and she straightened immediately with the automatic attention of a student, which made Ron smile. You already know what you did. You did everything. You found the correspondence clause and the 1612 charter provisions, and you built the argument about registry data reliability, and you managed to argue with Umbridge in an official session without once being technically out of order, which I think is more impressive than any of the rest of it. I was quite close to technically out of order at one point, she said. I know. It was very controlled of you. She pressed her lips together. Thank you, Harry. Ron. Ron looked at him. You said it was genuinely rotten. Right at the beginning, when it would have been easier to say something more complicated. That mattered more than you know. Ron looked at the table. Yeah, well, he said, which was wrong for I'm glad. Marchbanks. The solicitor looked up from the notes she was perpetually making. You built a case in 2 weeks that cleared 13 years of wrongful imprisonment. I'm going to say that plainly because it deserves to be said plainly. It's what you paid me for, she said, precisely. You also went well beyond what I paid you for, Harry said. Several times. On purpose. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. I did. Thank you. He looked at Sirius last. Sirius, who was sitting with his chair pushed slightly back from the table in the way he sat when he was feeling something large and trying to have room for it. Harry looked at him and said, You've been my home base for this whole thing. Every time I needed to think out loud, every time I needed someone to tell me the honest thing, every time, he stopped. There was something in his throat that he cleared with a single breath. 13 years, he said. And then this summer. He shook his head slightly. I don't have the words for it. Sirius said, quietly, neither do I. And then, but we've got time to find them. Yes, Harry said. We do. He sat down. He looked at Dumbledore at the other end of the table, and Dumbledore looked at him, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness exactly, and not alliance exactly, but was the thing that comes when two people have been honest with each other and have decided to continue in that vein, which is perhaps more durable than either. Now, Harry said, someone make dinner. Sirius stood immediately. Hermione opened her mouth to suggest something nutritional. Ron started arguing with her about it before she'd finished the first word. Remus got up to help Sirius on the grounds that Sirius's cooking was excellent but his kitchen organization was chaotic. Arthur began clearing space on the table with the practiced efficiency of a man with 6 children. Dumbledore sat at the table and watched all of it with an expression that was, quietly, very close to relief. The night before they were due back at Hogwarts, Harry went to the study alone. He stood in front of the corkboard, the map of the last 5 weeks, the documents and the names and the connections drawn in different colors. He looked at it for a long time. Then he took it down, methodically, removing each piece and stacking them in order, and put them in a document case that Ragnarok had provided, which locked with his blood seal and would hold everything intact. He kept one thing out. It was the family tree from Sharpfang's original audit, the long parchment, hand-drawn, with his name at the bottom and a cascade of names going back centuries. He looked at it differently now than he had in that stone room under Gringotts. Then, it had been a revelation. Now it was simply context. History. The shape of what he came from. He folded it carefully and tucked it in his jacket, which was where he kept things he needed to think about. He sat at the desk, which was covered in the last of the summer's notes, and thought about going back to school. 5th year. OWLs. Quidditch, probably, if he could manage the time. The Wizengamot sessions he'd need to attend, which he was already working out how to schedule around classes, Dumbledore had confirmed, with the specific embarrassment of someone correcting their own previous obstruction, that Hogwarts would accommodate any necessary absences for legal obligations. The second reading of the 43 pieces of legislation on Marchbanks's list, which he'd begun reviewing and which ranged from straightforward to deeply complicated. Voldemort, who was building towards something in the dark. The prophecy, which he'd been sitting with for 2 weeks and had decided was less a burden than a description. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. He had power. He knew that now, not just the magic, which had always been present, but the other kind, the kind that came from knowing who you were and where you stood and what you were for. The prophecy didn't change that. It named it. He could hear, distantly, the sounds of the house, Sirius and Remus in conversation somewhere, Hermione and Ron arguing about something that sounded like whether you could take more than 12 OWLs simultaneously, which was absolutely Hermione raising the question and absolutely Ron having strong opinions about the answer. He thought about Voldemort, watching this summer from wherever he was. Watching Harry Potter's inheritance become public, watching the Ministry scramble, watching 11 ancient houses wake up and consolidate around a 15-year-old boy. Watching Fudge resign. Watching Amelia Bones take office. He thought about what Voldemort would make of all of it. Voldemort had built his entire strategy around Harry being a symbol, a target, a focal point, the embodiment of the opposition. He'd planned for a symbol. He'd prepared to destroy a symbol. He had not, Harry suspected, adequately planned for the symbol turning out to have a legal team, a Wizengamot voting bloc, an international treaty mechanism, a free Sirius Black, and a great deal of patience. Harry allowed himself one moment of something that was not quite satisfaction. Satisfaction was too small a word and too finished feeling, but was in that territory. Then he stood up, put his notes away, and turned off the light. In the morning, the platform at King's Cross was the same as it always was, the chaos of carts and trunks and owls and the specific quality of September 1st that managed to be exciting and melancholy simultaneously, the way the end of summer always is. Hermione's parents were there, and the Weasleys in force, and Sirius and Remus standing on the platform in the full daylight of a public space with the ease of people who belonged there and knew it. Sirius had never seen Harry off to school before. He stood slightly apart from the general crowd with his hands in his pockets and the look on his face that Harry had learned to read as him cataloguing things he'd missed, moments he'd been owed and hadn't had. Harry walked over to him. "You'll write," Sirius said. "Constantly," Harry said. "About actual things. Not just, everything's fine, don't worry. You'll know if something's not fine before I write about it." "Probably," Sirius admitted. He looked at the train. At the platform. At all of it. "I didn't see you off for first year," he said. "I didn't see you off for any of them." I know," Harry said. "We have every one from here." Sirius looked at him. Then he pulled him into a hug that was brief and fierce and said everything that neither of them had the right words for yet, and let him go. "Go on then," he said. "Go learn things." "I know 11 things more than I knew in June," Harry said. 12 if you count soufflé. "I'm counting soufflé." He picked up Hedwig's cage. He looked back once, at Sirius, at Remus, at the Weasleys, at Hermione's parents who were watching their daughter with the slightly overwhelmed expression they often had these days, at the whole complicated, real, rebuilt assembly of people who had spent a summer doing something that mattered. Then he walked through the barrier and onto the platform and found a compartment and waited for Ron and Hermione, who arrived arguing about the OWL question, which had apparently not been resolved and showed no signs of being resolved, and who sat down on either side of him and kept arguing past him with the easy comfort of people who had been doing this for 4 years and intended to keep doing it. The train moved. London receded. Harry looked out the window at the city giving way to suburb giving way to countryside, the green opening up the way it always did, and thought about the year ahead, the work, the sessions, the Voldemort-shaped thing waiting in the dark, all of it. He was ready for it. All of it. Not because he wasn't scared, he was, in the specific, precise way that made you careful rather than reckless, but because he knew who he was now, and where he stood, and what he had to do, and the people at his back who would be there when he did it. That knowledge was not nothing. That knowledge was, in fact, the most useful thing he'd ever had. The countryside moved past the window, and the rings were warm on his fingers, and the train carried him forward into whatever came next. He didn't look back. Somewhere in a location the ministry had not found and the order had not yet pinpointed, in a cold and high-ceilinged room that had once belonged to someone powerful and was being borrowed by someone who considered that someone else's power a temporary inconvenience, Voldemort sat in the dark and read the summary his most useful operative had compiled of the summer's events. He read it twice. He was thorough. He set it down. He had known since the graveyard that Harry Potter was not what he'd expected, had felt it in the boy's magic, in the priori incantatem connection, in the specific quality of a 15-year-old who looked at him across the ruins of a cemetery and held his wand steady. He had known then that some of his calculations had been wrong. He had not known precisely how wrong. 11 houses. A Wizengamot block. A legal team. 3 pieces of legislation passed in a single summer. A minister replaced. The Treaty of Ironhold activated against the ministry by Gringotts on the boy's behalf. An Order of the Phoenix that was now operating with actual information and an apparently functional internal communication system. He read the part about Amelia Bones being appointed interim minister. He read the part about Sirius Black's exoneration. He set the document down. He had spent 14 years planning for the death of a symbol. It had not occurred to him, as a strategic failure he now needed to account for, that the symbol would spend the summer discovering it was a person. Persons were more difficult than symbols. Persons had resources. Persons had allies. Persons adapted. He looked at the dark ceiling and considered. He was not frightened. He was never frightened, or rather, he had spent too long believing himself beyond fear to access it even when it would have been useful information. But he was something. Something that was, if he were honest with himself, very close to the feeling you have when you discover that the board you've been playing has more pieces on it than you were counting. He would need to reconsider. He would need to understand what Harry Potter had become. He had thought he was fighting a boy. He was looking, now, at the beginning of something else. He did not know yet what to call it. He looked at the summary one more time. Somewhere in it, buried in a detail, in the specific mention of 11 house sigils rearranging themselves around a stag in the Gringotts ceremony room, was something that sat at the back of his awareness like a splinter, small and sharp and persistent. The stag at the center of 11 houses. He had killed the stag. He was beginning to understand, at a cellular, unpleasant level, that the stag had been only the beginning.